I'm not a fan of sharing, she said, voice sharper than she meant. Neither am I, he replied flatly, still not turning. But all the other rooms are soaked. Burst pipe flooded the entire east wing. She raised an eyebrow. I'll take the couch. This time, he turned. And when his eyes met hers, steel gray rimmed with flickers of firelight, she forgot how to breathe. He blinked, expression unreadable. Suit yourself, he said. I don't snore. She didn't answer, just walked across the room, setting her suitcase near the fireplace. The room was earthy, stone walls, copper fixtures, minimalist in design. Warm, soft, intimate. Too intimate. She pulled out her laptop and focused on the slides she needed to revise for her pitch the next morning. Across the room, the man returned to his notebook, scribbling with a piece of black charcoal. Sketches, mountains, cliffs, maybe. His fingers smudged, his brow furrowed in silent concentration. They didn't speak for nearly an hour. Then the power went out. Complete darkness. No hum, no light. Just the wind howling through the mountain like a siren. The silence felt heavier than the storm. You've got to be kidding me, Kimura muttered. From the other side of the room, she saw a flicker. A lantern lit. Soft and gold. The man held it, his face half illuminated. Shadows danced across his jaw. Storms knock the whole ridge offline sometimes, he said calmly. You get used to it. He crossed the room, handed her a thick wool blanket, then a glass of something amber. I don't drink with strangers, she said, eyeing the glass. Then talk to me. Make me less of one. Kimura hesitated, but something in his voice, low, steady, tired, felt safe. She took the drink. They sat on opposite couches, legs curled, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, lantern between them. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to stop working. I came here to work with a startup, she said. Brand consulting. 1 week, then gone. He nodded. I used to build startups. Used to? He leaned back. Burned through too much money, too many marriages. Decided I was better at planning things than pitching them. She tilted her head. And what do you plant? Sage. Tomatoes. Peace, if I'm lucky. His answers made no sense and perfect sense all at once. Kimura took a sip. It was mezcal, sharp and smoky. She hated mezcal. But somehow, it felt right tonight. I don't believe in soulmates, she whispered. He didn't flinch. What do you believe in? Stillness and clean breaks. He set his glass down, stood, walked slowly across the room. What about touch? She swallowed hard. He stood in front of her now, not threatening, not demanding, just waiting. And the look in his eyes wasn't lust. It was something else, something raw, a plea wrapped in silence, like grief looking for a place to rest. Kimura rose. She should have said no, but her heart had been quiet for too long, and the desert around them, the storm inside her, and the warmth between them refused to be ignored. They kissed like people who had lived through loss. She pressed her palms to his chest, felt his heartbeat stutter. His hands gripped her waist like she might vanish. Clothes dropped to the floor like burdens. No rush, no game, just reverence. Her back met the sheets. His mouth traced down her collarbone, her spine. Every touch was a question, every moan an answer. They moved with aching gentleness, as if their bodies were finally telling the truth their mouths couldn't. She didn't think about the morning, didn't think about the name she still didn't know. She only thought about now. When the sun pierced the blinds the next morning, the bed was empty. No sound, no scent, just a folded robe at the edge of the bed, and a single note. Thank you for not asking me to stay. Kimura stared at it, then slowly sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The fire had burned low, its crackle now just a hum beneath the silence. Kimura's robe clung to her like a whisper, her hair loose, damp from sweat and sleep. The room smelled of smoke and him, earthy, warm, distant. But Grayson was gone. The robe he left was folded with care. The note beside it brief, unassuming. Thank you for not asking me to stay. Not goodbye. Not, I'm sorry. Just a sentence that sounded like relief. And regret. She held it between her fingers, staring out the window. The desert stretched endlessly, as if it had swallowed him whole. Her hands ached, from how tightly she had gripped his shoulders. from how much of herself she had let him hold. The night had started soft, hesitant. But once the layers came off, the weight came with them. Grayson hadn't moved like a man chasing pleasure. He moved like someone starved for shelter. His touch didn't roam. It returned, again and again, to the same curve of her jaw, the same hollow above her collarbone, the same place behind her ear that made her breath hitch. Kimura hadn't cried in months, but when he kissed the scar on her hip, left by a childhood accident, she hadn't told anyone about in years, something inside her cracked. "You don't even know me," she whispered into his shoulder. "I know that silence in your eyes," he said. "It used to live in mine." They didn't speak much during, only breaths and tremors. His hands had memorized her like she was a language he was trying to relearn. Every inch of her body was traced, not taken. When she arched beneath him, he didn't thrust. He paused, looked into her eyes, and something shifted. She remembered whispering, "Don't look at me like that." He had rested his forehead against hers. "Like what? Like I matter?" "You do," he said, "even if I don't." When it was over, once, then twice, then again under the rustling blankets, he kissed the inside of her wrist and said nothing, just lay beside her, one arm beneath her neck, the other tracing circles on her thigh. And in that silence, Kimura realized something terrifying. She wasn't sad. She was seen, but now, with sunlight blinding the curtains and the weight of that note cutting sharper than his absence, she felt hollow. She showered. She didn't cry. She packed, dressing in silence, her body still tender from the night before. Every movement reminded her of how deeply he'd touched her, not just physically, but entirely. She slid the note into the front pocket of her planner. Not because she wanted to remember it, but because she didn't want to forget. The spa's cafe buzzed with soft music and herbal teas. Kimura sat near a window, sipping hot lemon water, her laptop open, slides scrolling. She nailed the presentation. Despite everything, her chest aching, her mind racing, she stood before the startup's founders and delivered the pitch with laser precision. Her brand strategy hit every mark. Burnout recovery through digital disconnection. Profit wrapped in mindfulness. Corporate healing in the language of innovation. They signed on the spot. She smiled. Firm, polite, professional. Then she flew home. Alone. That night in her apartment, she lay in bed, replaying the memory like a movie only she had seen. No one would believe her if she told it. She wouldn't tell it anyway. It was hers. All of it. His mouth. His voice. His scars. His silence. She wondered if he had meant to disappear, or if that's just what men like him did. Weeks passed. The city became noise again. Meetings, contracts, delivery apps, inbox floods, until her body started fighting back. First, the nausea. Then, the dizziness. Then, the pause in her cycle. She thought, no, not this. But the test said otherwise. 2 lines. Positive. Pregnant. Her world tilted. She sat on the edge of her bathroom tub, legs shaking, eyes fixed on the faint pink lines, hands over her stomach as if waiting to feel movement. There was nothing but quiet. Grayson's name wasn't even fully hers. She had no phone number, no forwarding address, nothing but a memory in firelight and a folded robe still buried in the bottom of her closet. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles, strong jaw, steady eyes. "I don't need him," she whispered. "I have me," and she meant it. Over the following days, she made a decision. No panic, no drama. She found a midwife, researched birthing centers, turned down projects that required travel and secured retainer clients that respected remote schedules. She turned her apartment into a home, and she started speaking to her belly every night before bed. "Hey, baby," she'd whisper. "I don't know who you'll be, but I'll be here, every step." 3 months in, she bought a notebook and started documenting her journey, just like Grayson had, sketching desert cliffs with black charcoal. But hers wasn't filled with drawings. Hers had words, words like hope, words like terrified, words like joyful anyway. 7 months later, on a cool autumn morning, she labored at the birthing center, her mother holding, her hand, lavender oils diffusing soft drumming music playing through wireless speakers. And then he arrived. Her son, her solace, the son she never expected. The first thing she saw were his eyes, steel gray, rimmed with a faint amber fire. Her breath caught. She couldn't speak. The midwife smiled. "He's alert," she said, but Kimura knew. He wasn't just alert. He was him, Grayson's child. She cradled him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're here," she whispered. "And you're mine." She pressed her lips to his forehead, then looked at the nurse beside her and said softly, "No father listed, just the two of them." A clean beginning, or so she thought. The world didn't stop when Solis was born. But for Kimura, time moved differently. It wasn't slower or faster. It was quieter. She moved through her days like a woman reborn, one hand on a bottle, the other on her laptop. Meetings conducted with a baby monitor blinking beside her. Slides reviewed while Solis napped against her chest. Clients didn't see the chaos behind the camera. Only her brilliance. That was enough. She hadn't spoken Grayson's name aloud. Not once, but she thought of him. Every time Solis smiled, every time she saw those steel gray eyes blink with curiosity, every time Solis giggled in his sleep, and she swore it sounded like a sound she'd only heard once, in a desert suite in the middle of a storm. 3 months in, Solis began recognizing her voice. He'd lift his head when she entered the room. He'd coo when she hummed in the kitchen. By month 6, he reached for her with tiny hands that knew only safety. She didn't need anyone else. Or, so she kept saying, but love has a way of growing where silence lives. And every time Solis clutched a fistful of her curls, every time he fell asleep on her chest, heart synced with hers. She felt it. The missing, not in the form of regret, but in the ache of a question she refused to ask. What if he'd stayed? Kimura avoided thinking too long about that night. She filed it under necessary, a fleeting moment that brought her solace. Nothing more, but her body hadn't forgotten. Some nights, she'd wake drenched in sweat, a whisper of his voice chasing her from sleep. She never told her friends about him, never admitted she still had his note, folded inside her planner, tucked behind a photo of her son. When Solis turned 1, she threw a quiet celebration. Just her mother, a few close girlfriends, balloons, cupcakes, laughter that filled the tiny apartment. But that night, after everyone left and Solis finally fell asleep, she sat on the floor, surrounded by wrapping paper and silence, and cried, not because she was sad, but because he would never know this day. And that felt wrong. A few weeks later, her phone buzzed with a familiar name, a client she hadn't worked with in a while. "We've got a new sustainability brand launching, high-end, off-grid wellness with a conservation angle. We want your touch on it." Kimura raised a brow. "What's the location?" "Ridgefire Preserve, in the Sierra Roja range." Her breath caught. It couldn't be, but it was. She Googled the retreat's name out of caution, and there it was. Homepage banner, full-screen photograph. A man standing atop a red rock ridge, bare-chested, hair caught in the wind, a notebook in hand, eyes like thunder clouds. Grayson, her stomach twisted. Founder and creative director at Red. Reclusive, off-grid, spiritual visionary behind Ridgefire's holistic design. The room spun. Kimura could have declined. She could have feigned illness, booked another project, claimed scheduling conflicts. But something inside her, the same instinct that had once told her to lean in, not run, rose again. So she said yes, not because she needed closure, but because Solis deserved air. And maybe the truth. The drive into the desert was long. She played lullabies on repeat, stopped every few hours to let Solis stretch. The baby carrier dug into her hip by the time she arrived. She didn't expect fanfare, but the moment she stepped into the Ridgefire Lodge, time seemed to pause. There behind the reception desk, framed in oak and lit with soft lamps, was the same photograph. Grayson, holding that same notebook. Alone, aloof, timeless. Solis gurgled in her arms. The receptionist smiled, unaware of the war Kimura was fighting in her chest. She made it through check-in, requested a ground floor suite, and avoided asking questions. That evening, she took Solis out into the gardens. Let him breathe the mountain air. Let him crawl in the sand. Let herself be, until she heard the footsteps. Slow, uneven, familiar. She didn't turn at first. Didn't need to. Her skin already knew. Grayson knelt beside a raised bed of sage, his hands in the soil, shirt sleeves rolled, brows furrowed in focus. Time had not dulled him. He looked older, but in the way mountains do, worn, rooted, certain. Sully squealed, and that sound turned Grayson's head. Their eyes locked. He froze, then stood. His gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. Steel met steel. Amber flickered. Kimura's throat closed. He stepped forward, slow, cautious, reverent. Solis blinked, then reached a small hand toward Grayson's chest, his fingers curling into the fabric. A beat of silence passed, then another, and finally, Grayson spoke. His voice broke on the words, "Is he mine?" Kimura didn't answer. Couldn't. Her arms tightened around Solis, who just laughed and tugged at Grayson's shirt. He knelt, wordless, let Solis touch his face, let the boy giggle into the curve of his jaw, and then he wept, not loud, not desperate. Just quietly, as if the wind had carried every piece of him back to her feet. Kimura looked away, because if she didn't, she'd cry too, and the last thing she wanted was to lose control. She didn't come for tears, she came for truth. But as Solis leaned forward and placed his forehead against Grayson's, babbling something only babies understand, she knew. Clean breaks don't exist, not when hearts remember, not when eyes match, not when the past holds your future in his hands and says nothing, but feels everything. The test sat on the bathroom counter like a loaded truth. Kimura stood motionless, her toothbrush forgotten in her hand, as she stared at the faint second line. 2 lines. Positive. Pregnant. Her body didn't react the way she expected. No gasp. No tears. Just a strange stillness that settled into her bones. A moment suspended between disbelief and inevitability. She ran a trembling hand over her stomach. It was still flat, unassuming, quiet, but something had changed. She replayed the timeline in her head like an accountant doing an audit. The storm, the retreat, the suite, the mezcal, the man. Grayson. That name still didn't feel real. It had come and gone like thunder. No surname, no phone number, no follow-up, just one night and a note. She sat on the edge of her bed, the pregnancy test still clutched in her hand. There was no one to call. Her ex wouldn't believe her. Her friends would lecture her. Her mother would ask about marriage. But Kimura wasn't scared. Not really. She was angry. "How dare you?" she muttered aloud, though Grayson wasn't there to hear it. "You touched me like you were broken, then disappeared like I was." She slammed the test into the trash bin, then pulled it out again 2 minutes later. It wasn't just a test. It was confirmation, proof that something meant had happened, even if he pretended otherwise. Kimura didn't chase men, and she sure wasn't about to start chasing ghosts. She opened her laptop and made a list. 4, budget for maternity, leave 5, breathe. That same week, she bought herself a leather-bound journal, brown, with stitched edges and thick pages. It reminded her of the notebook Grayson had drawn in. But this one was for her. She opened to the first page and wrote, "This baby wasn't planned, but maybe, just maybe, it's exactly what I needed." Morning sickness hit harder than expected. Lemon tea and ginger chews became her new best friends. Certain smells sent her running to the sink. But even through the nausea, she felt grounded. She was no longer just living for herself. Every meal was a decision. Every step was a promise. No name for the father, no need. She had herself. She had her baby. And for Kimura, that was enough. By the time her belly began to show, she was already managing 3 long-term client contracts remotely. Her home office was half desk, half nursery in progress. Friends sent books. Her mother sent prayers, and strangers sent unsolicited advice, but none of it mattered more than the quiet moments after midnight, when the world was still and she could feel movement in her womb, little flutters, like butterflies whispering secrets. She began to speak to the baby. "Who are you going to be?" she asked once, pressing her palm to the curve of her belly. "Do you have his eyes, his voice, his silence?" The baby kicked, and Kimura laughed through tears. She waited to find out the gender. She didn't throw a party, didn't post about it online. Some things were meant to be kept. But on a rainy Thursday, lying on the ultrasound table in a quiet clinic, She heard the words that made her breath stop. "It's a boy." Her eyes closed. Her heart expanded. "Hello, son," she whispered. That night, she opened her journal again. "And I don't need your name to know who you are. I know you by his eyes, by his quiet, by his echo in my ribs. I don't know if you'll ever meet him, but you'll always know you are chosen. You are loved. You are wanted. You are mine." Latin for sun, because he was the brightest thing to ever rise from a storm. Solis Wells, a name with no father listed, a name that belonged to both of them, and to neither of them. When her water broke, it wasn't dramatic. She was reading at home, chamomile tea in hand, belly round and firm beneath her robe. She felt the shift, the soft pop, and she knew. Labor was long but beautiful. The birthing center smelled like eucalyptus and sage. A doula hummed soft songs as she breathed through the contractions. Her mother held her hand through every wave of pain. There was no screaming, no panic, only power. And then he arrived, slick and small and loud, lungs announcing himself to the world with fury and force. They placed him on her chest, and when he opened his eyes, Kimura gasped. They were unmistakable, steel gray, lined with gold, just like his father. Her throat closed. She held him tighter, and the tears came freely. He didn't have Grayson's name. He didn't need it. He had his eyes, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Kimura barely slept, not from stress, but from awe. Every whimper, every yawn, every finger twitch made her marvel. This tiny being, this miracle, born from one night, birthed from a storm. She didn't speak Grayson's name aloud, but one evening she whispered to her son as she rocked him to sleep. "He was a man who kissed me like I mattered and disappeared like he didn't. But you, my love, you stayed." Solis slept, and for the first time in months, so did Kimura. The first time Kimura held Solis, she forgot every version of herself she'd ever been. Not the consultant, not the strategist, not the girl who'd once believed in timelines and 5-year plans. She was just a mother, and the moment his warm, damp body was placed on her chest, all the empty spaces inside her felt filled, completed, stilled. Solis didn't cry long, as if he already knew her heartbeat, as if he trusted that the world would be kind because her arms were the first place he landed. His skin was the color of roasted almonds, smooth and delicate. His hair, jet black, and already coiling in soft waves. But it was his eyes, blinking up at her through newborn fog, that unraveled her completely. Gray, not dull, not lifeless, alive. A mirror, the same ones that had studied her across a shared suite lit only by firelight. Kimura didn't speak his name aloud at first, but in her head she whispered it, "Grayson," and then louder, over the weight in her chest, "Never again." The nurses offered to take Solis for the night so she could rest. She declined. Instead, she held him through the quiet hours, watching him sleep as the moon poured soft silver light over their faces. "I've got you," she murmured, "and I'll never let you wonder if someone else is coming. I am your start, your middle, your always." Over the next few weeks, her world shrank, and she welcomed it. Diaper changes became meditation. Breastfeeding became devotion. Lullabies were written in the moment, soft made-up rhymes whispered into his ear as they swayed through long nights. She barely left her apartment. Grocery deliveries arrived at the door. Clients were gently reminded she was working reduced hours. And yet, the work she did during 2 a.m. feedings and 5 a.m. pumping sessions was some of her most inspired. She developed a rhythm. Morning cuddles, afternoon naps on her chest, evening walks with him strapped to her body in a gray sling. Each day felt like a small miracle, not because everything was perfect, but because she'd found peace inside the mess. Solis rarely fussed unless something was truly wrong. He liked being near her skin. He responded to music, and his eyes, those gray searching eyes, seemed to study her with ancient wisdom. When he was 6 weeks old, she took a photo of him wearing a knit hoodie with little bear ears. She stared at it for a long time, then flipped to the back of her planner where she had tucked that note. The one Grayson had left. "Thank you for not asking me to stay." She almost threw it away. But she didn't. Not because she was holding on to him, but because she had to remember where this journey started. So she slid the note back, deeper into the pocket, and wrote a new one in her journal. "He didn't stay, but I did, and so did you. That's the only story I'll ever need. Her friends visited with gifts and questions. Some asked about the father. She kept it simple. A long ago story. No chapter 2. They nodded, some with pity, some with curiosity, but no one pried. Everyone understood this was hers. She enrolled in an online parenting class, not because she needed help, but because she craved connection. There, she met other single mothers, fathers navigating custody, queer couples raising adopted siblings. It grounded her, reminded her that family doesn't follow formulas. It forms where love lives, and Kimura had love in abundance. Solis grew, fast. At 3 months, he rolled over early. At 4 months, he giggled every time she said the word bubble. At 5 months, he reached for her face and clung like she was the anchor to his entire world. Because she was. At night, after he slept, she'd sometimes stand by the window, wine glass untouched on the sill, and wonder, where was Grayson? Was he still sketching cliffs in the desert? Was he barefoot under the stars, lighting lanterns and planting sage? Did he think of her? Would he ever think of him? She always stopped herself before the wondering became wishing, because she didn't want him back. She just wanted Solis to never feel abandoned. On Solis's 6-month checkup, the pediatrician remarked, "He's got a watchful spirit. Doesn't just look, he observes." Kimura smiled. "He gets that from his father," she said quietly. The doctor raised a brow. "I mean, maybe," Kimura added with a practiced shrug. She rarely looked at her old photos. But one evening, while backing up her files, she came across the ones from the retreat. Not of Grayson. She'd never taken any. But of the suite, the corner with a fireplace, the blanket he gave her, draped over the armchair, and her own reflection, caught in a mirror, barely visible, holding a glass of mezcal, eyes cautious. She studied that image, and then looked down at the baby asleep in her arms. There was more strength in her now than she'd ever imagined. She whispered, "You are the best part of something I thought I'd lost." Solis stirred, his hand curling around her finger, and she knew, with absolute certainty, she didn't need Grayson to come back, but one day, he'd need to know. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Solis breathing. Kimura stood in the doorway of his room, watching his chest rise and fall in the crib. The soft glow of the nightlight painted his curls gold. One of his tiny feet peeked out from under the blanket. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would stay with her for the rest of her life. Not because something dramatic happened, but because for the first time, she felt completely settled. The world outside was racing, screaming for likes, deals, data. But in here, everything was still. She placed one hand on her heart, one on the doorframe. "I won't chase what left," she whispered. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was peace. She wasn't just raising a child. She was raising herself. Every day, she became someone new, less worried about being perfect, more focused on being present. Her clients praised her focus, her consistency. What they didn't know was that every pitch deck was prepared during nap time, that every voice call was taken with one eye on a baby monitor, that every slide she presented came from a brain fogged by late-night feeding and diaper changes. But still, she delivered, because that's what she did. She delivered herself into motherhood like it was a sacred right. No complaints, no apologies. One night, she wrote Solis a letter, not to give him now, but for when he was older. "My son, you were born in the middle of a question I didn't know how to ask, and somehow you became the answer to everything I was afraid to admit. You don't need to know how you got here. You just need to know that you were wanted the moment I knew you existed. I promise you this, you will never have to earn my love. You are made of it." She signed it with a heart, folded the letter, slipped it into a memory box beneath the crib, alongside his hospital bracelet and a snapshot of his first laugh. She didn't need a CO parent to make the box feel full. She needed honesty, and every item inside was a piece of her truth. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted. Solis outgrew his bassinet, learned to sit, then crawl, then pull himself up and wobble like a drunk little champion across the living room floor. Kimura clapped for him every single time. She never missed a moment, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her mother visited often, sometimes bringing groceries, other times just watching her daughter in awe. "You're doing this," she said one afternoon, watching Kimura feed Solis mashed avocado. "All on your own." Kimura smiled. "I'm not alone. I have him." Her mother's eyes softened. And what about his father? Kimura paused. Her hand tightened around the spoon. He gave me one night, she said carefully. But Solis, he gave me forever. There was no room for discussion after that. Her mother understood. On the night of Solis's first birthday, she baked a cake herself, banana and oat, sweetened with dates, no artificial sugar, no bright colors, just wholesome joy. She invited only a few friends, set up a balloon arch from a DIY kit, played soft jazz, lit one candle. As she held Solis in front of it, she whispered, "Blow, my love, blow for the life we're building." He smacked the candle instead and laughed. Everyone clapped, and for a moment, time froze. After the guests left, after the cleanup, she sat on the floor with Solis in her lap. His head rested against her collarbone. His eyes were fighting sleep. She hummed, no words, just the melody she'd made up during her pregnancy, the one she used to sing when he kicked inside her, the one that always made him calm. And then she whispered it aloud. "I don't hate him," she said softly. The admission surprised her, but it was true. "I just wish he had stayed, to see this, to know this." She looked down at Solis. "You are a miracle, baby. Even if he didn't stay, he gave me the seed. And you are the bloom." That night, as she lay in bed, arms sore from carrying her son all day, she reached for her phone to clear emails, and paused on a subject line. Consult request. Ridge Fire Preserve, Wellness Branding Initiative. She blinked. Heart slowed. Could it be? She clicked. The client was a sustainability startup planning a collaboration retreat. They needed a consultant with emotional storytelling experience, someone who understood mindfulness marketing, someone who could capture desert peace in a corporate message. The location? Ridge Fire Preserve. The sender's name wasn't familiar, but the request felt fated. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she closed the laptop and walked into Solis's room. He was asleep, legs spread like a starfish, stuffed sloth clutched to his chest. She kissed his cheek, then stood back and smiled. "I'm not going for him," she whispered to the room. "I'm going for you." She returned to her bedroom, sat at her desk, pulled out her journal, and beneath the letter she had written months ago, she wrote one line more. "I promise to never chase anyone again, but I won't hide from the path I was meant to walk." The desert looked different this time. Last time, it was escape. This time, it was intention. Kimura tightened her grip on Solis's carrier strap as she stepped out of the car. The air was dry, yes, but it didn't bite. It welcomed, as if the land itself remembered her. The concierge at Ridgefire smiled politely, unaware of the storm she was carrying behind her eyes. "Welcome to Ridgefire," she said, gesturing toward the lodge entrance. "We're honored to have you consulting with us." Kimura nodded, adjusted her sunglasses, and stepped into the building she had once barely escaped. Solis stirred on her hip. "Almost done, baby," she whispered. But nothing could have prepared her for what waited behind the reception desk. The photograph was enormous, framed in clean lines, mounted above reclaimed wood. It dominated the space like an altar. And at its center, him, Grayson, bare chest, wind in his hair, standing atop the red cliff like he was carved from the mountain itself. A notebook in hand, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the lens. Steel gray eyes. Familiar. Haunting. Kimura froze mid-step. Solis cooed. The receptionist followed her line of sight. "He hates that photo," she said casually. "Says it makes him look dramatic. But it's kind of our brand now." Kimura forced a smile. "Oh, yeah. That's Mr. Rohn, our founder. He's off-grid most days, working the land. Brilliant but hard to catch. We never schedule him for front-facing stuff. He doesn't like crowds." Mr. Rohn. There it was. His full name. Grayson Rohn. She mouthed it like a discovery. The concierge handed her a room key. "You're in one of the family suites. Easy access to the gardens and walking trails. Also comes with a small kitchenette, perfect for little ones." Kimura blinked. "You knew I had a child?" "We always ask for guest preferences in advance," the receptionist said. "Your project manager mentioned you might have a toddler with you." Kimura nodded slowly. So far, no alarms, no clues, no whispered gossip. He didn't know she was here. The suite was beautiful, earth-toned like before, but larger, with a separate nursery space and a patio overlooking the wildflower path. She placed Solis gently in the travel crib and unpacked in silence. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't calm either. It was braced. That afternoon, she walked the grounds, Solis on her hip, cheeks flushed from the heat, fingers curled around her scarf. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe just a sign. Maybe just confirmation that she wasn't crazy for being here. She passed raised beds filled with herbs, lavender, chamomile, basil, and then she saw him, kneeling in the soil, back turned, tan linen shirt rolled at the elbows, forearms streaked with dirt, hair shorter now, but unmistakably him. His hands moved gently, planting something, sage, maybe, one motion at a time. Solis made a soft squeal. Grayson paused. He didn't turn. Not yet. He slowly wiped his hands on a cloth, then stood, brushing the dirt from his knees, and turned around. His eyes met hers. Just like before, gray and unguarded. But now they dropped to her hip, to the child, to the baby boy who stared right back at him with his same eyes. Time slowed. The wind softened. Nothing moved except the look on Grayson's face, shifting from confusion to shock to something deeper. He took one step forward, then another. Kimura didn't move. Solis reached for his water bottle. Oblivious. Grayson's voice came like a whisper. Is he mine? Kimura's throat closed. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Solis babbled, stretching one chubby arm toward Grayson's shirt. And then it happened. Grayson dropped to his knees, as if something in him gave out. His eyes flooded. His chest rose, trembled. He looked at the boy like he was witnessing the impossible. Then, without asking, he reached out. Not to take, not to claim, just to touch. Solis placed his hand against Grayson's jaw. Soft, innocent, familiar. Grayson crumbled. Not loudly, not performative. The kind of tears that come from the middle of a man who didn't know he still had a center. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He just sat in the dirt, letting a child touch his face like he was made of light. Kimura turned away, because if she watched for 1 second longer, she wouldn't just cry, she'd collapse. And she hadn't come here to break. She had come to build. Back in the suite, Solis napped, unbothered by the emotional earthquake he'd unknowingly caused. Kimura stood on the patio, arms crossed, watching the horizon. She didn't know if Grayson would come back. She didn't know if he should. But she knew one thing. The past didn't always knock on your door. Sometimes it stared at you in the face of your son. The next morning, Kimura didn't expect him to come. And for a while, he didn't. She dressed Solis in a soft cream romper, strapped him into the wrap across her chest, and stepped out into the desert air. The Ridgefire Gardens were quiet. Rows of rosemary and sage brushed against the wind like whispers. Solis babbled, fingers tugging at her collar. Kimura adjusted his weight and kept walking. She wasn't running from the moment yesterday, but she wasn't chasing it either. She reached the far bench beneath the old Palo Verde tree, the same one she'd passed yesterday. She sat down and waited, for herself more than anything. But then she heard the footsteps, slow, uneven, bare on gravel. She didn't turn, not yet. The footsteps stopped behind her. Silence stretched. She could feel him watching. Then, softly, I didn't know. Kimura closed her eyes. Still didn't look at him. And if you had, she asked, voice even, I wouldn't have left. Her jaw tensed. You did leave. I thought it was a moment, one we both needed, but not more. Finally, she looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear. And you didn't think I might wake up needing more? She asked. I left a note. She laughed once, sharp and tired. You left a thank you. Like I gave you something to survive the night with. He didn't reply, because it was true. Grayson stepped closer, eyes on Solis. The boy studied him back, silent, curious, then reached for the pouch on Grayson's belt. He didn't flinch, just untied the leather pouch and handed it over. Inside was a small wooden carved owl. Solis giggled, clutching it immediately. Kimura blinked. He made that yesterday, Grayson said quietly. After I saw you. I couldn't sleep. My hands needed to move. She didn't know what to say. Solis played with the owl, chewing one edge. Grayson sat on the opposite bench, keeping his distance. "I'm not here to interrupt your life," he said, "or make demands. I didn't expect to look into someone's eyes and feel like I already failed him." Kimura swallowed hard. "His name is Solis," she said. "It means sun, because he was the first thing that warmed me after everything went cold." He nodded slowly. "It suits him." They sat in silence. Birds chirped in the distance. Solis dropped the owl. Grayson retrieved it, and Kimura found herself studying the man in front of her. He looked leaner, still strong, but softer, his face lined with something deeper than age. "Why Ridgefire?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "After I left Silicon Valley, I came here to detox. The land slowed me down. Then I started drawing again. The investor who owned this place offered to let me design the grounds. It grew from there." "So you ran," she said. He tilted his head. "I built, maybe to run, but maybe to heal." Kimura nodded. "Fair." She rose from the bench, unwrapping Solis gently from her chest. Grayson instinctively stood. She hesitated, then stepped forward and placed Solis in his arms. Solis didn't protest, just rested his head against Grayson's shoulder like it had always belonged there. Grayson's hands trembled. "I didn't earn this," he said. "No," Kimura replied, "but he didn't ask for you to be perfect. Just to be here." He nodded, pressing his cheek to Solis's head. "I can do that." They walked slowly back toward the lodge together. No promises, no apologies, just the quiet beginning of a door opening. Back at her suite, Kimura placed Solis down for a nap. Grayson hovered by the door. She turned to him. "What do you want from this?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "I want to know him. Even if you never forgive me, even if this is all I ever get, I want to earn every second." She studied him for a long time, then stepped aside. "You can stay for lunch." He didn't smile like a man who won. He looked like a man who'd been given a chance he didn't believe he deserved. And for now, that was enough. Lunch was quiet. Not the kind filled with awkwardness, but the kind where something unspoken sits in the air, thick, delicate, present. Grayson fed Solis mashed sweet potatoes with a tiny spoon, his large hands careful, slow. Each time Solis giggled, he smiled without showing teeth, like he was afraid to enjoy it too much. Kimura sipped water, watching them both. She wasn't evaluating. She was witnessing. And that was somehow more terrifying. After Solis was full, she rinsed the spoon, dried it, and set it beside the sink. Grayson sat on the floor with the baby in his lap, letting him crawl up his chest and tug at the silver chain around his neck. Solis babbled, clapped, then leaned in and kissed his cheek, sloppy, wet toddler style. Grayson froze, hands mid-air, chest still. Then he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 10 years. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to," Kimura replied from across the room. There was something healing in the silence that followed. Not the silence of retreat, but of recognition. Of two people who had no idea what came next, but were here now, in it, and present. Later that afternoon, Grayson walked them to the garden again. He carried Solis like he was carrying the world. Kimura followed, hands in her pockets, eyes on the wind moving through the grass. At the sage bed, Grayson knelt, balancing Solis against one knee while he reached for a small wooden box nearby. Inside were smooth river stones. He let Solis pick one. The baby chose a round gray one with a golden streak down the middle. "Just like you," Grayson whispered. Kimura heard, and something in her chest tightened. They didn't speak much, but he stayed that afternoon, helped prepare Solis's bottle, read him the board book she handed him, slowly, awkwardly, like a man afraid of getting it wrong. Kimura stood in the doorway, watched, waited for the fear to rise again. But it didn't. Not because everything was healed, but because there was no pretending now, no performance, no seduction, just a man and his son. That evening, Kimura sat at the edge of the bed while Grayson rocked Solis near the window. The baby fought sleep. Grayson sang something under his breath, low Spanish lullabies that didn't need translating. And then, without fanfare, Solis drifted off. Grayson stood still for a long time, holding him like a prayer, then turned, met her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." She blinked. For what? For not keeping him from me. Kimura stood slowly, walked over, and took Solis from his arms. The exchange was quiet, seamless, gentle. I thought about it, she admitted. I wouldn't have blamed you. I would have, she said softly. Eventually, I would have blamed myself. They stood there, not touching, not avoiding, just facing something bigger than either of them. I'm not trying to be perfect, he said. I don't need perfect, she replied. Just don't vanish again. I'm here. Good, she exhaled, and meant it. The next morning, he returned. No big announcement, no knock, just him, on the patio with a basket of herbs and a bag of sliced fruit. Kimura opened the door, raised an eyebrow. He held up the bag. For the boss, she smirked. You mean Solis? He nodded. Obviously, they ate breakfast together, mostly watching Solis mash banana into his face. No declarations, no heavy conversations. But when she handed Grayson a burp cloth without needing to ask, and when he caught it midair, wiped Solis's chin, and said, I've got it, she felt something shift, something settle. That evening, after Solis went down, she walked him to the garden gate. The moon was high, the path lit by low lights and rustling branches. They stood in the golden hush of desert dusk. I don't know what this is, she said. I'm not asking for a name. Good, because I don't have one. They stood close, but didn't touch. Then, slowly, Grayson reached up and tucked a curl behind her ear. You're not the same woman I met, he said. I know. You're more. She blinked, throat tight. And you're still dangerous. Because I left? No, she said. Because I don't want you to now. He leaned forward just slightly, not to kiss her, just to be near. His voice barely audible. I'm not going anywhere. Kimura didn't reply, but she didn't move either. And that was everything. The next morning, he was there again. Not a text, not a knock, not an apology wrapped in flowers, just him. Grayson stood in front of her suite with Solis's favorite plush owl tucked under one arm and a hand-woven basket filled with herbs in the other. Breakfast delivery, he said with a half-smile. Kimura opened the door in her robe, hair still wrapped in a towel. You know this is borderline stalker behavior, right? She teased. I brought lavender and mint, he said. That makes me a healer, not a criminal. She stared at him for a moment too long, then opened the door wider. Leave your shoes at the door. Grayson took her direction without flinching. He placed the basket on the kitchen counter, unwrapped the herbs, and washed his hands. Kimura watched from the dining table, arms folded as Solis babbled in his high chair. You cook? She asked. I survive, he said, cracking 2 eggs into a ceramic bowl. Never learned the flour and frosting stuff, but I know fire, salt, timing. She raised an eyebrow. Impressive. I can't braid hair, though, he added, in case that was a deal breaker. You're assuming there's a deal. He turned, eyes soft. I'm hoping there's a start. He didn't flirt. He didn't press. He made her tea. Fed Solis a banana. Cleaned the dishes before she asked. After breakfast, Kimura dressed Solis and took him for a walk. Grayson asked if he could come. She shrugged. Sure. They walked the trail behind the garden, Solis and the carrier against Kimura's chest. Grayson stayed close, but not too close. He pointed out hawks overhead, named every wildflower. At one point, Solis fell asleep. Kimura slowed her pace. Grayson matched it. I'm still learning how to be present, he said softly. I spent years chasing everything but myself. And now? She asked. He looked at her. Now, I just want to catch what matters. That afternoon, Grayson helped her reconfigure the baby gate in the suite. Solis had started climbing. She didn't ask for help. He just brought tools. Afterward, she offered him water. He sat across from her on the patio, shirt slightly damp with sweat. Why are you really here? She asked. I don't have a clever answer, he said. I just couldn't stop thinking about him, or you. I didn't come looking, but the moment I saw him, it felt like the world finally made sense again. And if I told you to leave, she asked. I'd listen, he said, but I'd keep hoping. She nodded slowly. Fair. That evening, Solis had a hard time settling. Kimura bounced him for nearly an hour. Nothing worked. Grayson offered to try. She hesitated, then handed him over. Solis resisted at first. But Grayson rocked him gently, whispered to him in that low voice, half melody, half memory. "I used to sing to nothing," he murmured, "just to fill the quiet. I never thought someone would hear me one day." 10 minutes later, Solis was out cold. Kimura blinked back the heat in her eyes. Grayson kissed Solis's temple and laid him gently in the crib, then turned to her. "I'm not asking for a title," he said, "or forgiveness. Just give me space to show up." She leaned against the wall, arms folded. "And what if you get tired?" "I don't plan to." She studied him for a long moment, then quietly replied, "Okay." The next day, he came back, and the next, and the next. He didn't overstay. He didn't play dad. He was simply present. Every moment earned, every visit quiet, every gesture intentional. Kimura found herself looking forward to his knock, to the way Solis lit up when he entered, to the way her heart didn't tighten anymore when he sat across from her. She caught herself laughing at something he said, then caught herself hoping, and that scared her. She wrote in her journal that night, "He's not the same man, and I'm not the same woman, but somehow we still fit, not perfectly, but honestly." One morning he brought a sketchbook, set it on the counter, said nothing. She opened it while Solis napped. Page after page. Drawings of the retreat, of desert winds, of sage in bloom, and of Solis. Sleeping, reaching, smiling, each drawing made with charcoal, with care, with quiet reverence. She ran her fingers over the final page. It was of her, eyes closed, cradling Solis to her chest. Grayson had captured her not as a goddess, but as a mother, powerful, present, whole. She didn't say thank you. She just closed the book and left her hand on top of it. That was enough. The conversation happened on a Wednesday. The sky was clear, the air soft. Solis had fallen asleep early, leaving the afternoon unusually quiet. Kimura sat on the patio, notebook in hand. Not her journal, just a blank page, half filled with rough ideas for a new campaign. Grayson appeared at the edge of the path, holding a glass jar of homemade hibiscus tea and a folded blanket. He didn't speak until she looked up. "May I?" She nodded. He sat across from her, placed the jar between them. For a while they just listened to the birds. Then, "I think it's time you ask me what you really want to ask." Kimura closed her notebook slowly, then met his eyes. "Why did you leave like that?" He inhaled, held it, exhaled through his nose. "I was scared." "Of what?" He laughed once, dry, almost bitter. "Of needing something I couldn't control, of feeling something I didn't expect, of becoming someone I didn't recognize." She studied him. "You make it sound poetic. But you didn't just leave a moment. You left me." He nodded. "I did. You disappeared." "I did. I woke up alone, in a place I didn't know, after sharing something I'd never shared like that before." His shoulders dropped. "I know." She leaned forward. "Do you?" "Yes," he said quietly, "because I woke up terrified that if I stayed, I would ruin it. I've ruined good things before, and that night felt too good." Kimura didn't speak. The wind brushed past, lifting a few strands of her hair. "I'm not asking for sympathy," Grayson added. "Just truth. That's all I have left." She leaned back, arms crossed. "You were a grown man, Grayson. You didn't need to run." He nodded. "You could have written your number, left your name." He nodded again. "You knew what kind of night that was. It wasn't casual." He looked down at the ground. "I didn't think I was worth staying for," he admitted. "And I didn't want to ask you to carry my mess. So you left me with mine." That landed. He blinked, then swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said finally. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't embellished. It was raw and real. "I should have stayed," he added, "even if I didn't know how." Kimura's eyes burned, not from hurt, but from the release that came with hearing the words. "I didn't need perfect," she said. "I needed real. And you were real. Until you weren't." He nodded. "I've thought about that night every day since," he said. "Not because of what happened between us, but because of what didn't happen after." Solis stirred in the other room. Kimura listened, then exhaled when the baby settled. Grayson looked up. "I don't know how to make up for it. I don't even know if I can." But I know I want to show up now. If you'll let me." Kimura turned her eyes to the garden. Sage, lavender, wildflowers, everything blooming in layers. Slow, messy, beautiful. "I'm not asking for you to be Solis's father," she said carefully. "Not yet, not officially. I just want to know you're not going to disappear again." "I won't. I mean it, Grayson. If you're going to leave, say it now." He looked her dead in the eyes. "I'm not leaving." She nodded slowly. "Then start by staying consistent," she said. "Feed him, change him, read to him, learn his rhythm. Don't try to be a hero, just be there." He let out a shaky breath. "I can do that." "Good." They sat in silence again. But this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was agreement. Later that night, after dinner and a quiet bath for Solis, Grayson stood at the door, unsure. Kimura opened it. "You don't have to knock," she said. "I don't want to assume." She looked at him carefully, then held out a baby monitor. "If he cries in the night, I'll wake you." Grayson took it like it was made of gold. He didn't sleep in her room. Didn't ask to. Just unrolled a mat on the floor beside Solis's crib. Kimura watched him for a moment from the hallway, then walked away. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally trusted that when she came back in the morning, he would still be there. The days that followed moved slowly. Not in the way boredom drags, but in the way healing takes its time. Measured, present, unrushed. Grayson didn't try to impress. He didn't overstep. He simply became part of their rhythm. Each morning he showed up with something, sometimes fruit, sometimes fresh bread, sometimes nothing but quiet hands and steady eyes. He was there when Solis woke up. He was there when Kimura needed to take a client call and had to pace the hallway. He was there when Solis made a mess of blueberries and needed a bath before noon. And he never acted like it was a favor. He just did it. Kimura watched him with cautious grace. There were moments when she'd catch herself smiling, then catch herself catching herself. Old habits, old walls. She wasn't sure if she wanted them down, or if she just wanted someone to know they were there. Grayson never asked for more, but he never backed away either. One evening, the power flickered. A storm rolled over the ridge, low rumbles and sudden wind. It reminded her too much of that night. She moved quickly to close the windows while Grayson secured the patio chairs. By the time the rain started, Solis had already fallen asleep. Kimura lit the lantern. Grayson stood by the table, shoulders damp, hair slightly tousled from the gusts. They looked at each other across the flickering glow, and for a moment, the past pressed into the room again. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He just walked over to the stove, poured hot water over the mint leaves he'd picked that morning, and set 2 mugs down. She took hers without a word. They sat on the floor, their backs against the wall, lantern between them. Silence thick, but not heavy. Then Grayson broke it. "I don't want to be a visitor." Kimura looked up. "I don't want to come and go," he continued. "I want to stay nearby, not in your space, but close enough to be counted on." She stayed quiet. "I've looked at land on the far side of the ridge," he said. "There's an old cabin, needs work, but it's quiet, secluded. I'd live there, fix it up, be close without crowding." Kimura blinked. "You're offering to live here? In the area," he clarified. "Not to impose, just to be part of the world that has him in it, that has you in it." She exhaled. "Why now?" "Because this is the first time I've ever been sure of something and not scared of it." She sipped her tea slowly, then set it down. "You really want this?" "I want a life that I don't run from," he said. "And this, you two, feels like one." The rain softened. Kimura stood and walked over to the lantern, adjusting the wick. The light flared gently. She turned to him, face unreadable. "Then show me," she said. "Don't pitch it, don't plan it, just build it." Grayson nodded. "I will, and don't wait for me to save you. I've got my own saving to do." "I'm not asking to be saved," he said. Just aloud. That landed. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. That weekend, Grayson drove out to the edge of Ridgefire and signed papers for the broken cabin tucked in a clearing near the canyon edge. By Monday, he was clearing brush, replacing beams, and hauling timber with blistered hands. Kimura didn't visit, but she heard the stories from the lodge staff. "He's serious," one of them said. Kimura nodded but didn't react. Solis, however, reached for the window every time the sound of hammers echoed from the ridge, as if his tiny body already knew someone was building something for him. One evening, Kimura walked to the cabin, Solis on her hip. The porch was still half built. Grayson stood shirtless, sweat-slicked and sunburned, wrapping twine around a beam. He turned as they approached. Solis laughed. Grayson dropped the rope and stepped down from the planks. He didn't reach, didn't assume, just smiled. I brought him to see his future backyard, Kimura said. Grayson wiped his hands. Still a work in progress. Like everything worth keeping, she replied. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she reached into the baby bag and handed him something. A folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. Inside was a simple sketch, a floor plan, 2 bedrooms, an open space, a reading nook. You drew this? He asked. I do more than pitch brands, she said. Grayson looked up, heart visible in his eyes. I didn't ask for permission because I'm not waiting for you to rescue us, she said. But if you're going to be here, then let's build something real. Solis babbled. The wind moved through the trees. Grayson folded the paper and held it to his chest, then said the only words that mattered, I'm not going anywhere. He didn't show up with declarations. He showed up with tools. A baby gate in one hand and a bag of screws in the other. Thought this might help, Grayson said, kneeling beside the playmat where Solis had just discovered the thrill of crawling at full speed toward danger. Kimura watched from the kitchen, sipping iced tea. You know we already have one. He looked up and smiled. This one's sturdier. She didn't argue. She let him install it. That became the rhythm. No fanfare, no big gestures, just quiet reliability, the kind that doesn't demand attention because it earns it. Grayson arrived every morning before sunrise. Some days he brought breakfast, other days just coffee and quiet. Kimura never asked him to, but she never asked him to stop either. One morning she opened the door to find him crouched with Solis, pointing at ants crawling along the pavement. He's fascinated, Grayson said, grinning. Every one of them has a job. Maybe he'll be a scientist, Kimura said. Or a philosopher, Grayson replied. He stares like he already understands things we don't. By week's end, Grayson had built a small shelf in Solis's corner, then a swing on the back patio, then repaired a flickering light that had been bothering Kimura for months. He never asked what needed fixing. He just noticed, and did it. He still lived in the cabin, still respected her space, but every afternoon Solis would press his hands to the window, bouncing and babbling, waiting for Grayson to arrive. And every time the door opened, his little arms would shoot up like victory flags. Da! He shouted once. Kimura froze. Grayson's breath caught. Neither of them corrected the baby. No one needed to. They fell into a rhythm, unspoken, fluid, human. He brewed coffee while she responded to client emails. She folded laundry while he read board books aloud in a voice too deep for the silly rhymes, which made it all the more charming. He didn't try to take control. He didn't try to own fatherhood. He just participated. And that, to Kimura, meant more than anything. One evening, Solis had a meltdown. Teething, overstimulated, overtired. Kimura bounced him, paced the room, tried every trick. Nothing worked. Grayson took him gently, held him against his chest, sang something in soft Spanish, low, rhythmic, ancestral. Solis quieted, then fell asleep. Kimura sat on the couch, exhausted. Thank you, she said quietly. Grayson didn't reply. He just looked at her and nodded. Not like a man who wanted praise, but like a man who knew what it meant to finally be needed without being feared. Later, when Solis was down for the night, Kimura poured them both glasses of water and sat across from him. I still don't know what this is, she said. Grayson didn't rush to answer. He took a sip, then said, maybe it doesn't need a name yet. She tilted her head. That's convenient. It's honest, he replied. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give. She nodded slowly. That's new for me. For me too. She leaned back in her chair, stared at him for a long moment. You said once you ruined good things. I did. And now? He met her eyes. I don't want to ruin. I want to repair. She didn't speak, didn't promise. But that night, she fell asleep a little easier. And when she woke to find him already in the kitchen warming up a bottle for Solis, humming, to himself, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and barefoot. She didn't feel invaded. She felt steady. Later that afternoon, they took Solis on a short hike. Grayson carried the toddler on his shoulders, narrating the entire journey like it was a grand expedition. Kimura walked behind, arms folded, letting herself laugh without apology. At the summit, they sat on a large flat rock. Grayson pointed to the sun hanging low over the ridge. "This is the part of the day that always made me feel lonely," he said. She glanced at him. "Still does?" He looked at Solis, who was curled up against his chest, dozing. "Not anymore." That night, Kimura wrote in her journal, "He still doesn't ask for credit, still doesn't ask for answers, but every day he asks to show up, and every time, I let him." It started with a cough. Nothing alarming at first, just a dry little sound from Solis as he clutched his plush owl before bedtime. Kimura wiped his nose, kissed his forehead, and laid him gently in the crib. But an hour later he cried out, and this time the sound was different. Wet, weak, worrying. She rushed into the nursery. His skin was burning. His breath came in short bursts, eyes glassy, face flushed. She scooped him up, heart pounding. "Solis, hey, look at me," she whispered. He whimpered, curled into her chest. She grabbed the thermometer, 101.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Her mind flipped into gear. Cool, compress, fluids, patience. But panic crept in. He wouldn't stop crying. He wouldn't drink. Her hands shook as she tried rocking him. Nothing soothed him. Then she remembered the monitor. Grayson. She called him without hesitation. 1 ring. 2. Then, "Kimura? Solis has a fever. I can't calm him. Her voice cracked. "I need help. I'm on my way." Less than 10 minutes later, he was at the door, barefoot, hoodie inside out, eyes wide. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask permission. He walked straight to her, hands out. She handed Solis over without protest. Grayson held him close, whispering in Spanish. Solis whined, soft, struggling. Grayson kissed his temple. "You're okay, Hijo. I've got you." Then he turned to Kimura. "Do you have a humidifier?" She nodded, already moving to grab it. "I'll boil water too," she said. "I've got it. Sit. Just breathe." For the next hour, Grayson paced the nursery slowly, rocking, humming, pressing Solis to his chest. Kimura watched from the hallway. She wasn't helpless, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed someone to help. Grayson never faltered. He checked a fever again, 102.1 degrees Fahrenheit. He dampened a cloth and gently dabbed Solis's forehead. He whispered lullabies Kimura had never heard before, songs that sounded older than language. And slowly, Solis calmed. His breathing deepened. The crying stopped. He fell asleep against Grayson's chest, hot but peaceful. Kimura exhaled, tears brimming. Grayson looked up. "He's okay," he said softly. She nodded, but didn't speak, just pressed her palms over her face and wept silently into them. Grayson didn't interrupt. He stayed where he was, rocking Solis gently. When Kimura finally looked up, eyes red, he said, "You don't have to do this alone anymore." She whispered, "I'm just not used to having backup." He nodded. "You do now." Solis slept for another hour. Kimura cleaned up the kitchen, paced the hallway, tried to convince herself it was just a fluke. But her nerves were frayed. Grayson laid Solis in the crib gently, covered him with a soft muslin blanket, then turned to Kimura. "I'm staying tonight." She didn't argue. They didn't speak much after that. She made a bed for him on the couch. He didn't protest. She placed a water bottle beside it. He murmured thanks, then turned off the light. But sleep didn't come easily. She stared at the ceiling, heartbeats stubborn. At 2:14 a.m., she got up to check on Solis. Grayson was already there, sitting beside the crib, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest. He turned slightly. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded. "You..." He hesitated, then said, "This is the most important thing I've ever done." She didn't know why, but that made her chest tighten. She sat on the floor beside him, both of them silent. Solis stirred once, then stilled. Kimura leaned her head against the wall. "I'm tired," she admitted. "I know." He turned toward her. "And I know I don't deserve trust overnight." She looked at him. But I want to be the one who's still here in the morning. She didn't respond, not with words. She just laid her head gently on his shoulder. And for the first time since Solis was born, she slept. When she woke, the sun was bleeding into the room. Solis was still asleep. Grayson was gone from the floor. She sat up quickly, until she heard a soft sound from the kitchen. He was making tea, wearing the same hoodie, eyes tired but calm. He turned, saw her, and smiled. Morning. She walked over slowly. How's he? Cooler. Checked his temp an hour ago, down to 99.9. She released a long breath. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't do anything you couldn't have. You did what I couldn't. Rest. He handed her a mug. You're not alone anymore. Family watching this. Have you ever felt like carrying everything alone was safer, until someone finally showed up and proved you didn't have to? If you believe love is showing up, not just showing off, drop a love emoji in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Love and Twilights for more stories that speak to your soul. The fever passed by morning. Solis woke with pink cheeks, a soft yawn, and a giggle that made Kimura melt. He reached immediately for Grayson. And Grayson, who hadn't even removed his hoodie, scooped him up without hesitation, balancing him on one arm while flipping a pancake with the other. Kimura stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching the two of them like a scene she hadn't dared to dream. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to prepare for loss. Grayson stayed the rest of the morning. He didn't rush to leave, didn't ask for an invitation, but when the time came, he reached for his boots by the door and said, I'll give you some space. Kimura raised an eyebrow. You don't have to disappear just because things are calm. He paused, then straightened. I didn't know if calm meant go or stay quietly. She stepped closer. Today, it means stay. He didn't smile wide, didn't react like a man who won something. He simply nodded. Okay. Grayson dropped to the floor and let himself be climbed. Kimura laughed softly. Hope you don't have anywhere to be, she said. I'm exactly where I want to be, he replied. They spent the afternoon in the courtyard, under the tree that shaded the nursery window. Kimura spread a blanket. Solis rolled around like a small king in the sun. Grayson built a tower of rocks with him, celebrating each successful stack with a soft boom. That made the baby squeal. Kimura watched with a smile tucked at the corner of her mouth, then closed her eyes, listened to the wind, the laughter, the steady beat of now. Later, as Solis snapped in the sling across her chest, she turned to Grayson. You're still fixing up the cabin? He nodded. Making progress. Got running water last night. Stove works. Roof only leaks in one corner now. Charming, she said dryly. Rustic, he corrected with a smirk. She hesitated, then asked, Do you sleep well out there? He shrugged. Better than I deserve. Kimura tilted her head. What if you didn't sleep there tonight? Grayson stilled, his hands folded in his lap. I didn't want to assume, he said. I know, she replied, but I'm asking. You want me to stay? She nodded once. Just the night, the couch, if that's what you're comfortable with. And you? I'm not asking for forever, she said softly. I just don't want to wake up alone with this ache in my chest when I know I don't have to anymore. He swallowed hard. You're sure? I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. That night, after dinner, she pulled out fresh sheets and a blanket for the couch. He helped tuck them. They didn't talk much, just moved in sync. Solis fell asleep quickly, still recovering from the night before. Kimura stood at the crib for longer than usual, one hand resting on the frame. Grayson stayed by the door, not intruding. After a while, she turned. Their eyes met. And in that quiet, something shifted again. She walked past him into the living room, sat on the couch, and tapped the cushion beside her. He joined. Not too close, not too careful either. I don't trust easily, she said. I know. And this, us, there's no label. There doesn't need to be. But I need you to know something. He waited. She turned to face him fully. I don't need help raising my son. I've done that. I'll keep doing that. But what I do need is to know that if I open this door, if I let you in, it's not just for Solis. His brow furrowed slightly. What do you mean? I mean, she said slowly, don't just be the father. Be the man who stays when it's not convenient, when it's messy, when it's late and we're both tired and nobody says thank you. Be here, not just in the room, but in the life. Grayson took a breath, nodded once. I'm not afraid of that anymore. She searched his face, and believed him. They sat in silence for a while. Then she reached for his hand, laced their fingers. Nothing more, nothing rushed. Just one gesture, one invitation, accepted. That night, he slept on the couch, and in the morning, he was still there, barefoot, hair tousled, holding Solis as the baby gnawed on a banana slice. Kimura stepped into the room, still in her robe, rubbing her eyes. Grayson looked up. Morning. Hey. She walked over, took Solis into her arms, kissed his cheek, then looked at Grayson and said, You're still here. He smiled softly. I told you, I'm not leaving. The evening air was soft. It carried that rare kind of warmth that felt earned, not forced. The kind that only comes after a storm has passed and everything has had time to breathe. Inside the suite, Solis was already asleep. Kimura had rocked him gently for longer than necessary, not because he needed it, but because she did. Because some nights, letting go too fast felt like a risk. Grayson was on the couch, one leg stretched, flipping through a children's book Solis had chewed the corner of. He looked up as Kimura stepped into the living room. No makeup, no performance, just her, in a soft linen wrap, curls falling over her shoulders, barefoot. He sat up straighter. You okay? He asked. She nodded once, then crossed the room. Come with me, she said. He followed without a word. Through the hallway, into the bedroom. She turned and closed the door behind them. There was no rush, no tension, just the sound of her breathing. And his. She stepped forward, touched the hem of his t-shirt. He raised his arms, and she pulled it off slowly. His skin was warm, golden, under the low lamp glow. The tattoos on his ribs stretched like language only she knew how to read. He didn't move, didn't assume, just looked at her, present, patient. She stepped closer, placed both hands on his chest. Last time, she whispered, we didn't know each other. I know you now, he said, and I'm choosing this, not because I need comfort, but because I want you. He exhaled, like her words released something he'd been carrying in his chest for years. Then he leaned in, not greedy, not hurried, just present. Their lips met, slowly, as if reintroducing themselves through touch. The kiss deepened, but not wildly. It wasn't about hunger. It was about reverence. Her hand slid up his back. His arms wrapped around her waist. When he lifted her, she gasped into his mouth, but didn't stop him. He laid her gently on the bed, stood over her for a second, just watching. She reached up and tugged at the waistband of his sweats. You're sure? He asked. I've never been more sure. They undressed each other with care, not as an act of seduction, but as a mutual unraveling. Every layer removed was a history shed. Every breath was permission. When he touched her, it wasn't to take. It was to remember her skin, her scent, her sounds. She arched under him with a sigh, not a scream. He kissed the inside of her wrist again, just like he had that night. But this time, she didn't flinch, because now, she knew what came after. Their bodies moved in rhythm. Slow, honest, grounded. He traced her hip like a man etching memory. She ran her fingers through his hair like she was anchoring herself to now. They didn't speak, because no words would have been enough, and none were needed. After, they stayed tangled, skin to skin, pulse to pulse. Kimura rested her head on his chest, eyes closed. Grayson's fingers moved lazily along her spine. Neither of them moved to break the moment. I thought I'd never feel safe like this, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. You built this safety, he said. I just showed up to respect it. She pulled back slightly, looked into his eyes. Don't ruin this by saying something perfect. He smiled. Then let me just say this. He cupped her cheek. I'm already home. She didn't respond with words. She kissed him again, softer this time, then curled into him and let her body rest, fully. Finally. That night, Grayson didn't sleep on the couch, and Kimura didn't pretend to want space. They shared the bed without tension, without fear, without needing to label it, because sometimes the clearest commitments are the quietest ones. The sun crept in gently, no alarm, no chaos, just the slow, golden stretch of light across Kimura's bedroom floor. She stirred first, eyes half-lidded, limbs still heavy from the weight of rest, and something deeper. She blinked and turned her head. Grayson was there, on his side, face relaxed, breathing steady, one hand resting on the sheet near hers. Their fingers weren't touching, but they were close. And that was enough. She watched him for a moment, not in disbelief, but in quiet confirmation. This wasn't a dream. He was still here, still breathing the same air, still choosing to be near. Moments later, Solis's monitor crackled with a soft whimper. Kimura sat up slowly, but before she could move, Grayson stirred beside her. "I'll get him," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. She smiled faintly. "You sure?" He was already on his feet, pulling on his sweatpants. She listened as he padded down the hall. Then, silence, then a giggle, then the deep baritone of Grayson's voice, half singing, half speaking. "Who's the boss of the morning?" "You are, you little thundercloud." Kimura pulled on her robe and walked out a few minutes later. Grayson stood in the kitchen, one hand holding Solis against his chest, the other flipping French toast on the stove. Solis was babbling, trying to grab the spatula. Kimura leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. "This is dangerous," she said. Grayson turned. "In what way?" "In the way that makes a woman forget how to guard her peace." He smirked. "Maybe peace wants to be shared." Breakfast was quiet. Solis smeared syrup across his cheeks. Grayson handed him a napkin and then laughed when the baby dropped it to the floor. Kimura sipped tea, the steam rising gently around her face. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't planned. But it was right. After breakfast, they moved into the living room. Grayson pulled Solis onto his lap and read a picture book upside down, exaggerating the voices and pointing out every animal. Kimura tidied the kitchen without being asked. It wasn't delegation. It was partnership. By mid-morning, Solis had fallen asleep in his bouncer chair. Kimura and Grayson sat on the porch, each with a mug. She watched the trees sway. He watched her. She felt it. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing. You're staring. I'm just grateful." She snorted softly. "For French toast and board books?" "No," he said. "For this." He gestured to the space between them. "This is the first morning I've woken up in years without anxiety, without regret, without wondering what I missed." Kimura didn't respond immediately. She turned her eyes to the horizon, then asked, "When did you realize you wanted to be a father?" Grayson took a long breath. "I think the moment he touched my face in the garden." His voice softened. "It wasn't about responsibility. It was about being claimed. Like he saw me and said, 'You're mine.'" Kimura's throat tightened. She sipped her tea to hide it. "I didn't know how to forgive you," she said after a while. "You didn't have to," he replied. "You just had to let me try." She looked at him. "I'm still letting. That's all I need." They sat in silence again. Not awkward, not unresolved, just steady. Later, Kimura cleaned the nursery while Grayson changed out the batteries in Solis's baby swing. He didn't ask. He just saw the blinking light and handled it. She caught herself smiling, and didn't stop. In the afternoon, they went for a walk through the lower trail. Solis strapped to Grayson's back in a carrier, babbling every time a bird flew past. Kimura laughed when Grayson tried to mimic a dove and failed miserably. "You're not exactly a bird whisperer," she teased. "I'm more of a baby whisperer now," he replied proudly. "You're something." At the end of the trail, they sat on a bench. Kimura stretched her legs out. Solis had fallen asleep again, forehead pressed to Grayson's neck. "I used to think love had to be intense to be real," she said. He turned to her. "And now I think the softest things are the hardest to fake." Grayson nodded. "This feels real." "It does." He didn't reach for her. She didn't lean in. They just sat there, under an open sky, between trees that had stood longer. Then their pain, letting the moment settle like dust after a long wind. When they returned, Kimura laid Solis down for his afternoon nap. Grayson started making tea. She walked into the kitchen, leaned against the fridge, and said softly, "Tonight, you don't have to sleep on the couch." He turned, brow raised slightly. "I can sleep wherever makes you feel safest." She stepped forward. "I think that might be next to me." He nodded slowly. "Then that's where I'll be No celebration, no dramatic kiss, just the steady unfolding of something real, like morning light across new skin. The desert night was cooler than usual. Kimura stood by the window, watching the stars flicker faintly behind a thin veil of clouds. The suite was quiet. Grayson had just finished cleaning Solis's bottle in the kitchen, and the rhythmic clink of glass on ceramic had faded into soft silence. She hugged her arms around herself. Not because she was cold, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt everything. Behind her, Grayson stepped into the room. His shirt was off, low light casting soft shadows across his chest and shoulders. He didn't speak. He just waited. Kimura turned, her fingers curled loosely at her side. "I used to sleep in silence," she said quietly. Not just quiet, silence. The kind where even my own breath felt too loud. Grayson took a step closer, and now? She blinked. Now the sound of someone else breathing feels like proof that I'm not doing this alone anymore. He walked over, stood inches away. "I never wanted you to do it alone," he said, "but I know I made it happen." She looked up, her expression open but wary. "And what happens when the calm fades? When the work gets hard, when I pull back or shut down, because that's what I've taught myself to do? I don't leave," he replied simply. Her throat tightened. "You say that now?" "No," he said gently. "I say that because I finally know what I want to build. I used to run from permanence, but now I crave it." She stepped back, sat on the edge of the bed. He followed, but didn't touch her. Instead, he crouched in front of her, resting his hands on his knees. "I'm not asking you to believe in something blind," he said. "I'm asking you to watch. Watch how I stay. Watch how I choose this, even when it's not easy." Kimura searched his face. "What if I don't always know how to let you in?" "Then I'll wait on the porch," he said. "Every time. Until you open the door." Tears stung the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange ache of finally being understood. She reached out, touched his jaw. "You're not perfect, Grayson. I know, and neither am I." He nodded. "But you and I," she whispered. "We were never supposed to be flawless. Just willing." He rose, pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Then let's be willing, every single day." They climbed into bed together again that night, not like strangers reaching across a divide, but like a woman and a man who had fought through storms just to arrive at a space where softness was no longer dangerous. Solis woke just after midnight, fussing gently. Kimura started to sit up, but Grayson was already halfway out of bed. "I got him," he said. She smiled sleepily. "You don't have to. I get to." He cradled Solis back to sleep with quiet hums, pacing the room slowly, one hand rubbing the baby's back in long, rhythmic strokes. When he returned, Kimura was still awake, still watching. "I used to think," she murmured, "that if I let myself want a man too much, I'd lose myself in the process. And now I think I'd only lose myself if I chose a man who didn't see me, didn't hold me." Grayson slipped into bed beside her, one arm slipping under her shoulders. "I see you, Kimura." He kissed her temple. "And I hold you. Even when you're quiet, even when you don't ask." Morning came again, no drama, no declarations, just movement and rhythm. Grayson made breakfast. Kimura dressed Solis. They shared glances across the kitchen, laughed when Solis tossed his banana slice at the dog bowl. They weren't playing house. They were beginning one, brick by brick, not just in actions, but in presence. After breakfast, Kimura stepped outside to check on a delivery. When she returned, she found Grayson and Solis on the floor surrounded by blocks and stuffed animals. Solis pointed at a small framed photo on the table, one Kimura had taken on Solis's first birthday. "That's you," Grayson said to the baby. "And that's your mama." Then his voice lowered slightly. "And soon, we're going to take a new one. One where all of us are in it." Kimura paused at the doorway, hand over her heart. No more doubts, no more tiptoeing, no more goodbyes. It started with a knock, not the kind that announced family, not the kind that belonged to neighbors. This knock was sharp, timed, businesslike. Kimura was feeding Solis sliced apples at the dining table when she heard it. Grayson opened the door, and every trace of softness disappeared from his expression. Two men stood outside, suits tailored, smiles too wide, and behind those smiles, history. "Gray," the taller one said, extending a hand. You're hard to find these days. Grayson didn't shake it. Because I wanted to be. Kimura stood now, holding Solis against her hip. The taller one glanced at her, then at the child, raising an eyebrow with barely hidden calculation. I see you've been busy, he said with a thin smirk. The other man chimed in, voice smoother. We came with an opportunity. Grayson's jaw tightened. You came with temptation. Let's not pretend it's more noble than that. Still, he didn't slam the door. He stepped aside. 10 minutes. That's all. Kimura watched them enter, men who once called themselves brothers in boardrooms, who vanished the minute Grayson walked away from the empire he built. They sat in the living room. The taller one, Lennox, spoke first. We've acquired a new round of Series C funding, 8 figures, and our next move requires a face with your legacy, your integrity. Grayson didn't flinch. The other, Marcus added, we're not asking you to rebuild, just endorse. Join the advisory board, 1 press run, a few international appearances, and in return, Grayson asked flatly, a seat at the table again, full equity restored, back where you belong. Kimura listened from the hallway. Her grip around Solis grew tighter, because those words, back where you belong, once meant the world to Grayson. They meant the nights he never slept, the anxiety that stole his appetite, the way he'd once let ambition bury the boy who just wanted to be enough. You built that company, Marcus said. Don't let your silence hand it over to vultures. You mean like you? Grayson asked quietly. Lennox laughed, trying to play it cool. We all made mistakes, Gray, but only I paid for them, Grayson replied. And now that the stock's soaring again, you remember my name. Marcus leaned in. We remember what you're worth. That's the difference. Silence followed. Then Grayson spoke. Leave the paperwork. I'll consider it. Kimura's heart dropped. Later, as the door closed behind them, she watched Grayson stand still, back against the wood, eyes closed. He didn't look triumphant. He looked conflicted. You told me you left all that behind, Kimura said softly. Grayson opened his eyes. I did. Then why are they here? Why are you considering? He stepped forward. Because part of me still wonders if I walked away too early, if I gave up the throne instead of fighting to sit on it with integrity. She placed Solis gently in his crib, turned to face him. And what would that throne cost this time, Grayson? He didn't answer right away. And in that pause, Kimura felt something old, not mistrust, but memory, of all the times ambition came first, of all the times she waited for a man who only knew how to chase power. I told you I wouldn't walk away again, Grayson finally said, but maybe I can stand beside something that once broke me and make it right. Kimura's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. What if you don't come back the same? I will. You can't promise that. Silence. Then, you're afraid, he said gently. I know what it costs, she replied. Not just to you, to me, to Solis, to the quiet mornings, to the man who just started breathing again. Grayson sat on the edge of the couch, head in hands. I'm afraid too, he whispered. She didn't move to comfort him. Instead, she sat across from him, letting the space between them hold the weight of every decision. Is this about money? She asked. No. Then what? He looked up. It's about legacy. She leaned in. And what about us? He blinked. That word landed harder than he expected. Us. Kimura didn't say more. She just waited. Let him sit with it. Let him face what was really being asked of him. Night fell. Dinner was quiet. Solis babbled in his high chair. Grayson stared out the window. And Kimura waited. Later in the dark, as they lay beside each other, she whispered, You don't have to be rich to be remembered. You just have to be present. He turned to her, eyes shining in the dim light. I don't want to lose either. She touched his cheek. Then don't chase the version of you that hurt to become. Stay the man we need you to be. He kissed her knuckles, and for the first time since the knock, his shoulders softened. It began with a silence, the kind that follows a question, unanswered, the kind that fills a room louder than thunder. Grayson stood by the window, scrolling through the proposal Lennox had left behind. Pages of terms, percentages, invitations masked as flattery. Kimura leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her eyes locked on his back. You're still thinking about it, she said. He didn't look at her. Didn't need to. His silence was already an answer. Say it, Grayson, she pushed. Say you want to go back. He turned slowly, exhaling. I didn't say I wanted to go back. No, you didn't say anything at all. That's worse. Her voice trembled, not from rage, but from recognition. I watched you disappear into ambition once before. You think I don't see the signs? Grayson dropped the proposal on the table. It's not ambition this time. It's unfinished business. Unfinished for who? For them? For your pride? Or for the little boy in you who still needs to prove he mattered? He winced, and that tiny flinch told her everything. You left that world, she continued, stepping closer. You built something new with your hands, with your peace, and now the moment they snap their fingers, you consider trading that in? It's not that simple, Kimura. No, it never is. That's how it starts. One maybe, one what if. Then 3 months later, I'm waking up next to a stranger chasing things that never loved him back. Grayson's jaw tightened. He turned away again. She wasn't finished. You say you won't run, but I can feel it. I can feel you pulling away. Every time your phone vibrates, every time you stare off like you're already somewhere else. He spun toward her. I'm not pulling away. I'm thinking about what? His voice rose, too loud, too sudden. About whether I can be a man who builds something bigger without losing the people I love. She stared at him, stunned, not by the volume, but by the fracture it revealed. You think we're in the way? No, he said, breath heaving. I think I'm scared. Of what? He took a step toward her. That I'll never stop being tempted. Kimura's eyes shimmered. She backed up slowly, the pain twisting her lips. Then maybe I was wrong, she whispered. Grayson froze. Wrong about? She swallowed. About believing you were done running. He opened his mouth, closed it again, because she wasn't throwing accusations. She was naming fears, real ones. This isn't about a company, Grayson. This is about patterns. Yours, mine, ours. She walked past him, paced the room like she was trying to keep her heart from breaking. I gave you my trust again, not because you promised to be perfect, but because you promised to stay. I'm here. Physically, yes. But you're halfway out the door already. That landed. Hard. I'm not leaving, he said, softer now. You don't have to pack a bag to leave, she replied. Then quieter, sometimes leaving is in the eyes. In the way you say maybe instead of no. In the way you hesitate before choosing us. They stood in silence, a storm of words already said, 1,000 more pressing behind their teeth. Kimura turned away, hands on her hips, head bowed. Grayson walked to her, stood behind her without touching. Then finally he asked, What do you need from me? She spun. I don't want your apology. I want your choice. Her voice cracked. Choose us, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but because you finally understand what this is. He nodded. Breathe deep. And then, slowly, walked to the fireplace. He took the investor folder, and without hesitation, ripped it in half. The pieces fell to the floor like broken chains. Kimura didn't speak. She just watched. And when he turned back to her, something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in him. I'm tired of chasing ghosts, he said. She stepped forward. Her hand found his chest, right where his heart still beat fast. Then stay where you already are, she whispered. With us. With you. They didn't hug, didn't cry, but something unspoken passed between them. A truth louder than shouting. A choice finally made. That night, there was no make-up intimacy, no overcorrection. They simply coexisted, sharing space, Solis asleep in the next room. In the early morning hours, Grayson reached for her hand beneath the covers. She laced her fingers with his. No words, just presence. No more running, no more hesitation, just a man and the woman who believed in him, waiting to see if he could finally believe in himself too. The sun rose differently that morning. Not louder, not brighter, but clearer. Grayson stood barefoot in the kitchen, coffee in one hand, the other resting gently on the island counter. The fire from the night before had faded from his eyes, but something else had replaced it. Resolve. Kimura walked in quietly, a soft robe around her shoulders. You didn't sleep, she said. He shook his head. Didn't need to. She paused, then nodded toward the folded folder in the trash. That final? Grayson didn't hesitate. It's already done. Kimura walked to the fridge, pulled out Solis' breakfast tray, but her eyes stayed on him. What changed? He took a long sip, then placed the mug down carefully. Solis, she raised a brow. He talk in his sleep now? Grayson chuckled under his breath, then looked her in the eye. No, but last night, when I kissed him goodnight, he mumbled something. What did he say? Grayson's voice went quieter. He said, Dadaste. Kimura's breath caught. He's never called you that before. No, he hasn't. A beat of silence passed. Grayson continued, softer now. I sat in his room for an hour, just watching him breathe, listening to those tiny dreams, and I realized, I've already built something. We have. She walked over, placed her hand on his chest. What are you going to do? I'm taking my son for a hike. The message to Lennox and Marcus was short. I've made my choice. I'm not interested in resurrecting anything. I'm raising something better. Grayson Vale. He didn't wait for a reply. Didn't need to. By 9:30 a.m., Solis was buckled into a carrier on Grayson's back, bouncing excitedly, as his little fingers gripped the straps like they were ropes in a pirate ship. Adventure time? The boy chirped. Grayson grinned. Absolutely, buddy. They drove to a quiet desert ridge, where the hills met the edge of mountain cliffs and the air held stillness that made you listen. Not just hear, listen. Grayson parked the car, took a deep breath, then lifted Solis onto his back. Ready, Captain? Ready. Solis beamed, and they started climbing. The hike wasn't long, maybe 2 miles, but each step carried weight, not of the child on his back, but of the man he used to be, of the moments he missed, of the dreams he once thought would make him immortal, but nearly made him a ghost instead. Solis babbled happily the entire way, about birds, about rocks, about nothing and everything, and Grayson listened, every word, every giggle, like it was the first boardroom that ever mattered. Halfway up, they stopped under a shady outcrop. Grayson unstrapped the carrier and let Solis run in tiny circles, picking up pebbles and pointing at butterflies. Then, as Solis squatted to poke a cactus, Grayson pulled out his phone, opened the draft contract, and deleted it. Solis ran to him, arms wide. Water? Grayson handed him the bottle, smiling as Solis drank like a champion. He wiped his son's chin gently, eyes full of something ancient. Joy and gratitude. You know, Grayson said, almost to himself, this is the deal I never saw coming. Solis tilted his head. Deal? Grayson laughed. Yeah, you, your mom, this life. Solis looked confused, then pointed to his tiny chest. Me, you. They reached the summit an hour later. Nothing extravagant. Just a rocky clearing with a view of endless sand and sun-dusted peaks. But to Grayson, it was cathedral. And Solis? The sermon. They sat together, wind brushing their faces. Grayson held Solis in his lap, both of them eating apples and almond butter out of a tiny lunchbox. Why mountain? Solis asked between bites. Grayson smiled, because sometimes the best views come after the hardest climbs. Solis furrowed his brow like he was storing that line for later. Grayson chuckled. You'll get it when you're older. Then, softly, Solis turned and laid his head on Grayson's chest. Dadaste? Grayson froze, heart thudding. He placed his hand over Solis's tiny back and whispered, Always. They stayed until the sun shifted, until silence no longer meant avoidance, but peace. When they packed up and descended, Grayson felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because he finally knew what was worth carrying. At home, Kimura met them at the door. Solis ran to her, proudly pointing at his scraped knee like it was a trophy. Grayson followed, slower, different. How was the hike? She asked, brushing Solis's curls. Grayson leaned in, kissed her forehead. Life-changing. She raised an eyebrow. He nodded. I turned them down. She exhaled, not with relief, but recognition. You mean it this time? He held her gaze. I already built something worth more. He turned toward Solis, now pretending to be a mountain lion on the carpet. Every boardroom in the world could collapse, and it still wouldn't match the way he looks at me when I say his name. Kimura stepped forward, voice soft. And when you say mine? He took her hands. That's the name that taught me how to come home. They stood there, a family, not perfect, but chosen. Not without scars, but with reasons to heal. Later that night, as Grayson tucked Solis into bed, he whispered, "No more running, little man. Not from you, not from her, not from who I am." Solis was already half asleep, thumb in mouth, comfort in his chest. But as Grayson turned to leave, the boy murmured, "Dada." "Big mountain?" Grayson grinned, nodding. "Biggest one yet." The courthouse didn't look like much from the outside. Just another beige building with flags fluttering in the wind and people going in and out like it was any other Tuesday. But to Grayson, it might as well have been a cathedral, because today he wasn't filing to own something. He was filing to belong. Kimura sat beside him on the bench outside the clerk's office. Solis was with her mother for the morning, playing with toy trucks and making up stories about lions who drank strawberry milk. Grayson held a folder in his hands, not sleek, not branded, just simple manila. Inside, paternity acknowledgement forms, parental responsibility affidavits, name change preferences, custody declarations, a letter he wrote himself, attached to the application, just in case. He was quiet, but not because he was unsure. He was reverent, because this was a sacred thing, a vow without a priest. Kimura placed her hand on his thigh. He turned to her, breath slow, chest rising and falling like he was preparing for a ceremony. "You ready?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." They were called in. The room wasn't grand. A small office, 2 chairs, 1 desk. The clerk, a gentle woman in her 50s, looked over her glasses as Grayson introduced himself. "Here to file a parental claim?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "For my son." The woman smiled, reaching for the stack of forms. "All right, let's make this official." Grayson sat down, took the pen, and began signing, line after line. Full legal name, date of birth, relationship to child, desire for shared custody, acknowledgement of moral and financial responsibility, desire for birth certificate amendment to reflect father's name. Kimura watched him, watched the slight tremble in his fingers, watched the concentration in his brows, watched the way his hand moved like this wasn't just a form, it was a promise written in ink. He paused once, pen hovering. "Everything okay?" the clerk asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just realizing this might be the most important signature of my life." The clerk smiled again but said nothing. Some moments don't need commentary. They just need space. When he got to the bottom of the page, there was a section for remarks. Grayson surprised everyone by pulling out a folded sheet of paper. "I brought something," he said. "Can I attach it?" The clerk nodded. He handed her the letter. She scanned the top lines, then looked up. "You want to read it out loud?" He glanced at Kimura. She gave him a slight nod. So he stood, cleared his throat, and began. "To whom it may concern, I don't know if there's a standard for fatherhood, but I do know what absence feels like. I know what it's like to look into a mirror and wonder why the man who helped create you never looked back. I don't want my son to carry that question. I don't want him to measure his worth by someone else's departure. I want him to grow up knowing one truth, that from the moment I knew he was mine, I chose him, that I didn't run, that I didn't disappear, that I stood up and made it official, not because I had to, but because I get to. His name is Solis, and he is not just a part of me. He is me, only better." Grayson Vale. The room was silent. Not even the clock ticked loud enough to interrupt. Kimura's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She just stared at him like she was seeing the final version of a man she once hoped for. Grayson handed the paper to the clerk, who gently placed it inside the application file. Then she looked up. "You didn't have to attach this," she said kindly. "I know," he replied, "but I needed it on record." Kimura finally spoke. "And if he reads it one day?" Grayson turned to her. "Then he'll know I meant every word." They stepped out into the hallway, papers filed, receipts signed, hearing scheduled. Kimura leaned against the wall, arms crossed, quiet. He waited for her to speak. When she didn't, he gently asked, "What are you thinking?" She looked up at him, voice soft. "I used to dream about a day like this." "Courthouse dreams?" She smiled. "No, a man who wouldn't need to be begged to stay, who would claim our son not out of duty, but desire." Grayson stepped closer. "No one had to convince me, Kimura. Solis claimed me the day he looked up and smiled like he already knew who I was. He took her hand. She didn't pull away. You think he'll understand? She asked quietly. Maybe not now. But one day, he'll look back and know his father fought to belong. That he didn't just show up, he stood up. A tear rolled down Kimura's cheek. She shook her head, laughing lightly through it. You're gonna make me cry in a government building? Grayson smirked. Good. Let them all witness it. Love needs records too. They walked outside, into the bright Beverly Hills sunlight. Grayson shielded his eyes. Kimura pulled her phone from her bag. A photo of Solis popped up on the lock screen, sticky-cheeked, gap-toothed, grinning. She turned it toward Grayson. Let's go tell him his name is one step closer to having yours beside it. Grayson took the phone in his palm, stared at the picture, then at Kimura, and whispered, Best deal I ever signed. Columns. It smelled of eucalyptus and something nostalgic, like warmth that had memory. Grayson stood outside for a moment, adjusting the collar of his linen shirt. The envelope in his hand creased slightly from how tightly he'd been holding it. The door creaked open before he could knock. You're early, said the voice gently. Grayson turned. She was small, maybe in her 70s, but held herself like someone who delivered generations into the world and still had stories to tell. You must be Grayson. He nodded, offering a hand. Thank you for seeing me, Miss Idara. She smiled, waving his hand away. I held your son before you did. We're family already. Come in. The living room was filled with light, books, photographs, tapestries of newborn footprints. On one wall hung a simple wooden frame, where life begins, love never ends. Grayson sat on the edge of a deep armchair, unsure whether to speak first. Idara poured hibiscus tea, handed him a cup, then settled opposite him. You're nervous. A little. Good. Means your heart's working. He smiled faintly. I never got the chance to thank you, he said. You just did, by showing up. Grayson cleared his throat. I wanted to hear about that night. From someone who was really there. Idara studied him. You're ready for that? Yes. She leaned back, her eyes softening like she was stepping into a memory. It was raining, she began. Desert storms don't knock, they barge in. Your Kimura was already in early labor when she arrived, breathing fast but quiet, determined. Grayson swallowed hard. She said she was alone, Idara continued. Didn't give details, just kept whispering. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Grayson closed his eyes for a second. She meant me. Idara nodded. She wouldn't let me call anyone. Said the child deserved to be born without expectation, just love. Grayson looked down at his cup. Was she scared? Idara's voice didn't falter. She was scared of silence, of giving birth to someone she'd have to explain too much to. But when the pain came, she bore it like fire. Grayson's eyes brimmed, but he didn't blink them away. Was he okay? Solis? Idara smiled. He came out with fists balled and eyes wide. Didn't cry at first, just looked around the room like he was confused why we'd made him leave somewhere warm. Grayson chuckled lightly. Idara continued, but the moment she said his name, he let out the biggest wail, as if he'd been waiting for her voice. Grayson stared at the steam rising from his cup. I missed it. You did, she said, without cruelty. Just truth. And that's okay. You're here now. Most men don't even look back. There was a pause. Then Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. I brought something. He slid it across the table. Inside, a photo of Solis holding a sketch of his family. Grayson, Kimura, himself in the middle, drawn with blue wings. And this? A drawing he made last week, Grayson said quietly. Said I was an angel who came back. Idara touched the image gently. He's not wrong. You see a lot of fathers? Grayson asked after a moment. Some. Most don't come until the baby is breathing. Some never come at all. He nodded slowly. What do you think makes the difference? Idara looked up. Regret. Grayson met her gaze. Or love, she added. Sometimes both. He leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Personal. She tilted her head. Why did you stay with her that night? Most would have referred her to a hospital. I saw something in her eyes. Not just pain, purpose. And I knew that child was coming into the world loved, even if love had to do the labor alone. Grayson's chest tightened. Did he look like me? Idara smiled. Immediately, Grayson looked away. That must have made her feel something. She held him close, kissed his forehead, and said, "He's got your fire, Grayson, but I pray he has my peace." Silence lingered, thick but sacred. Then Adara leaned over, placing her hand on his. "She forgave you, you know, not in words, in labor." Grayson looked up, confused. "She screamed your name once, not in anger, in longing. That's not resentment, that's still love." He stood slowly, emotions roiling beneath the surface. "Thank you for sharing this with me." She stood too. "Do something with it." He nodded. "I already started. I filed the papers." Adara smiled warmly. "Good man." As he reached the door, he turned back. "Can I come back? Maybe with Solus?" She chuckled. "I always keep almond cookies for firstborns." Grayson grinned. "He's got a sweet tooth. He got that from you." Outside, the sky was overcast again. But Grayson felt the opposite. For the first time since Solus was born, he wasn't haunted. He was healed. Driving home, he called Kimura. She picked up instantly. "Everything okay?" Grayson spoke slowly. "I met the woman who delivered our son. Heard what I missed." Silence. Then Kimura's voice, soft and steady. "And?" Grayson looked out the window, sun peeking through cloud. "And I'm done punishing myself. I may not have been there when he took his first breath, but I'll be there for every breath after." Kimura didn't speak. He could hear her exhale. "You're growing, Grayson." "No, I'm returning. To the man I should have been." When he got home, Solus ran to him with wide arms and a popsicle-stained smile. "Dada, look, I made a rocket." Grayson knelt down, scooping him up, holding him tightly. "I missed your first launch," he whispered, "but I'm here for every flight now." The mountain air was cooler this time, quieter, not because the storm had passed, but because something inside them had calmed. Kimura stepped out of the truck first, cradling a thermos of ginger tea. Grayson followed, his hand clasping hers with a steadiness that hadn't been there months ago. The retreat house stood just as it had before, wooden, weather-worn, and surrounded by silence. "I haven't been back here since that night," Kimura whispered. Grayson nodded. "Neither have I." Inside, the air carried a faint mix of cedar and memory. The room they'd once occupied, candles lit, laughter echoing, hearts vulnerable, felt like stepping into a photograph, one taken before life unraveled and found its way back together. Grayson set down the bag. Kimura wandered slowly toward the low table by the fireplace. She ran her fingers along its surface. "Nothing's changed." "You have," he said gently. She turned, eyes soft. "So have you." They didn't rush. There was no need. Tonight wasn't about passion. It was about peace. Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out something folded, aged paper, corners curled, words written in haste and heartache. He offered it to her. "You left this behind that morning." Kimura hesitated before accepting it. She unfolded it slowly. Her voice shook only slightly as she began to read. "I don't know what this was. I don't know who I am when I'm around you. But I know it's the first time I felt something that didn't need fixing." She paused, looked up at him. Grayson's eyes didn't waver. She continued, "I came here to escape failure, but all I found was a fire I didn't expect, one that didn't burn me, just reminded me I'm still alive." Her voice grew quieter, yet stronger. "I'll probably never see you again, but if I do, tell me you felt it too." Silence fell. She folded the note, pressing it against her chest. "I did," she said softly. "I just didn't know how to name it." Grayson walked toward her. "I was naming it without language, but I knew." She looked up at him. "And now?" "I still don't have all the right words," he said, stepping closer. "But I have one." He gently took her hand and placed it on his chest. Home. That's what it felt like. Even back then. Kimura blinked back tears. "You were scared. So were you. But we still came back," she whispered. Grayson nodded. "We made a promise in that room without even speaking it. We both just forgot. Until now." They sat near the fire pit, the logs already stacked, the match in his hand trembling slightly. Kimura watched him light the flame. One flick, a spark, then warmth. They wrapped themselves in the same woven blanket from that long-ago night. Grayson handed her the thermos. She took a sip, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. He inhaled. Only the time I wasted doubting what I already knew. She nodded slowly. For a long time, I told myself this room was a mistake, a detour. Me too, he admitted. But now I think maybe it was the start of everything, she whispered. Grayson smiled. I came here to forget who I was, and you became who you were always meant to be. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had softened. Inside, the silence felt like a song. You know, Kimura began, turning to him, that night. I prayed. He looked at her gently. I asked for clarity, for a sign, anything to remind me that love could still reach me. She touched his face. And then you looked at me like I was more than my wounds. Grayson kissed her knuckles. You were. She leaned in closer. And so were you. They didn't speak for a while. The flames danced before them, casting golden shadows on the walls. Finally, she whispered, I'm ready to forgive everything. Grayson looked at her, surprised. Even me. Kimura shook her head. No. Especially you. He closed his eyes. Let the words sink into places he didn't even realize were still aching. Thank you. She shifted, resting her palm against his cheek. We get to choose how this story ends. He nodded slowly. I choose us. The fire burned lower. Kimura unfolded the note again, set it beside the flame. Let's leave it here, she said. Why? Because the man who wrote this was searching. The man I'm with now. He's found. Grayson nodded. He reached into the bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Then, let's make something new. Inside the box, a blank page. He handed her a pen. Together, they wrote a new letter. This time, addressed to Solis. Dear son, this place is where you began. Even before we knew your name. Before the papers. Before the courtrooms. Before the family photo on the fridge. This fire was our first promise. That love, real love, isn't found. It's chosen. Again and again. And you, Solis. You are the best proof we ever made the right one. Love, Mom and Dad. They folded it, placed it inside the box, and buried it beneath the tree just outside the retreat cabin, where roots could keep it safe, where Solis might one day find it. And no, not every love begins with clarity, but the ones worth keeping, they always circle back. The sunlight had a different glow on Sundays, not rushed, not commanding. It just arrived, like the world itself was taking a breath, inside the modest home nestled on the edge of the desert's quiet slopes. The scent of maple syrup danced with a rhythm of sizzling batter. Kimura flipped pancakes with one hand, the other resting lightly on her hip. Solis, pajama-clad and wide-eyed, sat at the counter swinging his little legs, deeply invested in the colors moving on the TV. Grayson? He stood barefoot in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, quietly watching. Not from a distance this time, but inside it all. Part of the picture. You're burning the edges, Kimura teased without looking back. I like them crispy, he replied, smirking. She shot him a playful glance. That's not what you said last week. I've evolved, he said, leaning over to kiss her cheek. Solis giggled. You guys are being mushy again. Kimura chuckled and slid another pancake onto the growing stack. Grayson walked over to his son, tousled his hair, and took a seat beside him. What you watching? Solis pointed. It's about a raccoon who wants to be a chef. Grayson arched a brow. Ambitious little guy. He burns the soup, then he fixes it with marshmallows. Genius, Grayson said. Remind me to try that. These were the moments that never made headlines, but they healed something. Moments where no one was apologizing. No one was making up for lost time. Just being. They moved as a unit now. After breakfast came the shoe chaos. Solis insisted on wearing the mismatched sneakers with the rocket ships, even though one shoe squeaked with every step. Grayson knelt beside him. You sure you want to squeak all day? Solis nodded proudly. It makes people laugh. Grayson grinned. Then let's make the world smile, buddy. Next was the park. Not for grandeur. Just grass, swings, and sunlight. Kimura sat on the bench with her sketch pad while Grayson chased Solis across. The playground, his laughter echoing like wind chimes in the breeze. He didn't check his phone once. Didn't need to. The deal he'd turned down, the empire he'd walked away from, it didn't exist here. And he didn't miss it. He was too busy pushing Solis higher on the swing, yelling to the moon, as the boy screamed joyfully. Kimura captured it all in graphite swirls and soft shading. A father, a son, a sky that no longer threatened rain. Back home, Grayson took charge of lunch. Grilled cheese and apple slices arranged like stars. Gourmet, Kimura said, biting into hers. I learned from the raccoon chef, he replied. After lunch, Solis built a spaceship from pillows. Grayson was designated co-pilot. Where are we flying? He asked, ducking inside the living room fort. Solis pressed buttons made from bottle caps. To Planet Family. Grayson froze, just for a second. Then he nodded. Best destination I've ever heard. Later, Kimura watched them nap on the couch. Solis curled against Grayson's chest like he'd always belonged there. And maybe he had. That night, when the moon hung low and quiet outside their bedroom window. Grayson stood brushing his teeth, staring at the man in the mirror. Not the tailored version. Not the CEO with polished promises. Just this one. Sleepy-eyed. T-shirt wrinkled. Whole. Kimura leaned against the doorframe, just like that night of their fight. Only this time she was smiling. You okay? He nodded. I never thought I'd love this much peace. She walked over, wrapped her arms around his waist. You built it. He turned. No, he said. We did. She leaned into his chest. Do you miss the boardrooms? He shook his head. I never laughed in them like I do in this kitchen. Never looked forward to Monday like I do now. They stood there, holding each other, no titles between them. Just breath, skin, love that grew in silence. Before bed, Grayson tiptoed into Solis's room. The boy slept with one hand clutching a plastic astronaut. Grayson knelt by the bed, whispered into the dark. I'll be here every Sunday, every Monday, every time you squeak your shoes or burn your marshmallow soup. He kissed his son's forehead. Then his voice dropped even lower. You're my best decision. He walked out quietly, closing the door without a sound. And for the first time in his life, Grayson didn't wonder what came next. He just lived what was already here. Kimura used to dream of diamonds. Not the sparkle of wealth, but the symbolism. A moment when a man knelt, trembling with nerves, and asked to be chosen forever. The quiet gasp. The tears. The kiss that sealed a promise. She imagined it on balconies, in gardens, maybe even at sunset on a mountaintop. But none of those fantasies included laundry baskets, leftover stew, or the sound of a child giggling in the background while mismatched socks tumbled in the dryer. And yet, this was what she had now. And strangely, it felt like more. Grayson never proposed, not in the traditional sense. There was no velvet box, no orchestrated moment, no camera hidden in the flowers, just a series of quiet choices, steady hands, presence, like that morning he replaced the broken faucet without being asked. Or when he stayed up late helping Solis build a papier-mâché volcano, even though the project was due in 2 days and neither of them knew what they were doing. Or when he reached for her hand at the grocery store as casually as if he'd done it for years. They were at the farmer's market one Saturday. Solis perched on Grayson's shoulders holding a tiny basket of cherry tomatoes when an old woman selling handmade candles smiled at them and asked, How long have you two been married? Kimura opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Grayson just chuckled, long enough to know when to buy the lavender one without asking. The woman laughed. Kimura didn't, not because it wasn't funny, but because in that instant, she felt something click. That evening, while folding Solis's clothes, she glanced toward the man in the kitchen. Grayson was dancing, badly, off-beat, barefoot, stirring pasta with one hand while the other waved dramatically. In the air as a Sinatra song played from the old speaker on the windowsill. He didn't know she was watching. That made it more beautiful. She sat on the edge of the bed later, brushing her hair, when he walked in and kissed the top of her head. Need help with anything? She shook her head. You already are. He blinked. I haven't done anything. That's exactly what makes it everything. They lay in silence that night, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle circles on her shoulder. I used to picture it, she whispered. He looked down. Picture what? How it would happen. The proposal, the ring, the whole moment. He stayed quiet. She continued. But I don't anymore. He turned slightly, uncertain. Why not? She smiled. Because every time you stay, you already ask the question. And every time I let you in, I already answer. The next morning she found a note on the kitchen table. It wasn't elaborate, just one sentence in Grayson's handwriting. If this is what forever looks like, I don't need a ceremony. I just need your coffee smile. That night, Solis fell asleep in Grayson's arms, the two of them on the couch, the TV playing low, a blanket tucked around them like time had stopped to listen. Kimura sat across from them, heart full, tears quiet. She realized that forever wasn't a performance. It was the art of showing up. He showed up when the car battery died. He showed up when Solis had a fever at 3 a.m. He showed up when she snapped at him from exhaustion, and he answered with patience, not pride. One day, Solis asked, "Are you and Daddy married?" Kimura smiled, kissed his forehead, and said, "We love each other every day." Solis shrugged. "Cool. That sounds better." Grayson never got down on one knee. He never asked. Because she never needed him to. He answered in the way he stayed, in the way he laughed at her jokes, in the way he made the bed on her tired days, in the way he whispered her name, not like it was an obligation, but like it was a psalm. One Sunday they were walking hand in hand through a dusty trail behind the house. The wind was soft, the earth warm beneath their feet. Solis ran ahead, pretending to be a superhero. Grayson stopped, looked at her. No preamble, no performance. "I'd choose this every time," he said. She met his gaze. "I know. She never wore a ring, but every morning he tied a robe for her while she brushed her teeth. That felt more permanent. She never had a bridal bouquet, but every Friday he brought home wildflowers from Solis's school garden, tied with a rubber band and hope. That felt more real. One night they stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing their teeth side by side. Solis was already asleep. Kimura looked at their reflection. "You really never planned to propose?" Grayson rinsed, then turned to her. "Honest. I wanted to." She tilted her head. "What stopped you?" He shrugged. "You look too happy already. Didn't want to mess it up." She burst into laughter. And then silence. And then a soft kiss pressed to his jaw. "I don't need you to ask," she said. "I just need you to stay." He looked her in the eye. "I'm not going anywhere." And that was it. No ceremony, no announcement, no spotlight. Just soft Sundays, tiny shoes by the door, a son whose world was safe, a woman who no longer needed a ring to know she was chosen, and a man who built home by waking up every day and staying. Sunday evening settled over the house with its familiar hush. Dinner had been cleared. Pajamas had replaced play clothes. The desert wind tapped softly on the windows like an old friend checking in. Grayson had just stepped out to take a call on the back patio. Kimura was curled up on the couch, half lost in a book but more in her thoughts. Solis padded quietly down the hallway in his little rocket pajamas, holding one of Grayson's leather-bound journals. "Mommy," he whispered, "can I ask you something?" Kimura closed the book, concerned by his tone. "Of course, baby. What is it?" He opened the journal and held up something that shimmered between the pages. A ring. Simple, elegant, gold. No stone, just timeless. Kimura's breath caught. "He had it in here," Solis said. "I wasn't snooping. I just wanted to draw something and grab the journal he writes in a lot." She reached out slowly and took the ring from his small hand. Her fingers trembled, not because of the surprise, but because some part of her had known that something deeper stirred in Grayson's silence. "Do you think it's for you?" Solis asked, eyes wide. Kimura smiled gently. "I think it might have been." Later, after Solis had drifted off to sleep, Kimura stepped onto the back patio with the journal and ring. Grayson was staring out at the night sky, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the desert air cool and dry. She said nothing at first, just sat beside him, held out the journal. His eyes dropped to the cover, then lifted to hers, then to the ring between her fingers. No panic, no scramble to explain, just stillness and honesty. "You were going to ask me," she said. It wasn't a question. Grayson nodded. "I bought it the week after Solis called me Dad for the first time." Kimura turned to him, surprised. "That long ago?" He nodded again. "I thought maybe we needed more time. Maybe you needed to know I wasn't rushing this." She held the ring up between them. "Why hide it in a journal?" He smiled faintly. "I didn't want it to be a deadline. I wanted it to be a promise waiting, not pressure." She studied his face in the moonlight. He wasn't avoiding. He was hoping. I used to think I needed a grand moment, he said, but every time I looked at you in the morning brushing your hair or pouring cereal for Solace, it felt like I was already living it. Kimura exhaled slowly, pressing the ring into his palm. You waited for the perfect moment. He looked down. Or maybe I waited too long. She shook her head. No, you waited until I stopped needing a proposal to feel chosen. The air grew softer around them. Stars blinked like silent witnesses above. Grayson placed the ring beside them on the patio table, then pulled the blanket open and offered half to her. She slid under it, nestling beside him, her cheek on his shoulder. They sat like that, quiet, close, certain. Then Kimura whispered, "You never got to say the words." He turned slightly toward her, voice low. "I didn't buy that ring just because I thought it was time. I bought it because every part of me started thinking in we, because loving you made me braver, because you were never just a chapter, you were the rewrite." Her breath caught in her throat. "And I knew," he continued, "that if I ever lost everything again, but still had you and Solace, I'd still be the richest man in the world." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. It didn't come from pain, but from a love that had learned how to wait without fear. He reached for her hand, then the ring, then paused. "I don't want this to be a question," he said. "I want it to be a statement." She met his gaze. "I'm already yours," she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, not like an ending, but like a sunrise. Under the vast desert sky, no one clapped. There was no applause, no spotlight, just two people who had walked through fire, rain, silence, and storms, and chose to sit under stars, wrapped in one blanket, one promise, one life. Inside, Solis rolled over in his sleep, murmuring something about pancakes and planets. And outside, two hearts beat in rhythm, no longer asking for the future, because they had already started living it. The morning sun rose with ceremonial grace, like it too knew something sacred was about to unfold, on the edge of the desert bluff where the wind whispered secrets between cacti and sandstone. Rows of white chairs had been arranged beneath a soft canopy of cream and gold, not for a wedding, but for a naming. Kimura stood in front of the mirror, adjusting Solis's tiny suspenders. The boy's curls had been freshly fluffed, his shoes polished until they shone. He tugged gently at the bow tie. "Do I have to wear this?" Kimura knelt down, straightened it, and smiled. "Just for today, baby." He made a face. Kimura tapped his nose. "You're the star, soul shine." Outside, Grayson waited in a tailored linen suit, no tie, no collar buttoned, just ease. His fingers clutched a small note card, creased at the corners from how many times he'd unfolded it. Guests began to arrive. Not hundreds, but enough. People who mattered. Friends, the midwife, his legal team. Former colleagues turned confidants. A few from Kimura's old book club, the desert community they'd grown to love. And at the center of it all, Solis. When the music began, soft guitar, warm percussion, Kimura stepped onto the aisle holding Solis's hand. Grayson's breath caught, not because he hadn't seen them like this before, but because this time, everyone else did too. When they reached the small platform, Solis jumped up eagerly and grabbed the microphone from the stand. "I'm 5, he declared. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Grayson stepped forward. "Told you he'd open the ceremony," Kimura whispered to him. Grayson grinned. Natural showman. Then he turned to the crowd, eyes sweeping across faces who'd gathered to witness. Something more intimate than a contract, more sacred than a company launch. A family's public vow. He cleared his throat. "I didn't grow up dreaming of fatherhood," Grayson began. "Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't know how to picture it." He looked down at Solis, and then this little boy appeared. Like a sunrise I hadn't prepared for, Solis beamed, standing proudly beside him. Kimura's fingers interlaced tightly in front of her, holding emotion at bay. Grayson continued. "Today isn't about a name on a certificate, it's about what names mean, what being named means. To be claimed, celebrated, loved loudly." He turned slightly, gesturing toward his son. "This is Solis, Elijah Thorne, my son. Not by accident, not by obligation, but by choice." Kimura's breath hitched. Solis blinked. "That's a long name," he whispered. Grayson chuckled softly. "Yeah. It's going to sound powerful on business cards." He turned back to the guests. You all know pieces of my story. You've seen me walk away from boardrooms. You've heard about the missed years, the mistakes. But what matters is that I'm here now." He placed a gentle hand on Solis's shoulder. "And I will always be here." Applause came slowly at first. Quiet, reverent, then fuller, warmer. A woman from the community stepped forward with a handmade pendant, gifting it to Solis. Another brought a woven cloth with traditional embroidery, symbols for endurance, new beginnings, and protection. Kimura was given a bouquet with lavender and desert rose. Strength, the woman explained, and softness. She thanked her, blinking away tears. Then came the moment Grayson hadn't told anyone about. He reached for a small easel draped in canvas, pulled it off slowly, revealing a large framed certificate, not legal but symbolic. It bore Solis's name in calligraphy, alongside 2 handprints, Grayson's in deep bronze, Solis's in golden yellow. Beneath them, a quote, "Chosen in love, named in legacy." He turned to Solis. "Want to make it official?" Solis nodded enthusiastically. Together they pressed Kimura's hand onto a small tray of clay, then gently added it to the bottom corner of the frame. 3 prints, 1 family. Later, as music swelled and guests enjoyed refreshments under canopy shade, Solis ran between legs, and flower arrangements with cake on his cheeks and a crown made from string and paper stars. Grayson leaned against a pillar, watching. Kimura joined him. "Told you he'd steal the show," she murmured. Grayson looked down at her. "I didn't mind being background. Not today." She leaned against his chest. "He'll remember this." Grayson nodded. "So will I." They stood there until the sun dipped low, painting the desert in hues of amber and tangerine. Solis found them just before dusk. "Daddy?" Grayson turned, crouching. "Yeah, buddy?" Solis tilted his head. "Can I have another name day next year?" Grayson chuckled. "How about we make every day a name day?" Solis thought for a moment. "With cake?" Kimura laughed. "Only if you brush your teeth." As guests began to depart, one by one, Grayson and Kimura walked slowly back. Toward the house, Solis skipping ahead with a balloon trailing behind him. The desert sky bloomed with stars. No titles, no headlines, just legacy, written in laughter, footsteps, and a name now shared. The house was still. A rare quiet had settled after the naming celebration. Solis was fast asleep, arms flung across the pillows like he tried to hug the whole day in his dreams. The stars outside blinked soft approval through the window. The desert wind carried no drama tonight, only stillness. Kimura sat by her writing desk, a cup of hibiscus tea untouched beside her. Candlelight flickered near the edge of her vision. She wasn't crying. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was simply ready. She pulled out a fresh sheet of linen paper, the kind she'd been saving for when the moment felt sacred enough to deserve it. Tonight felt like that moment. Her hand hovered over the paper. Then, slowly, she began. "Dear Grayson, I've written you in my head 1,000 times. Words I never sent. Words I buried under fear, under stubborn silence, under the ache of almosts. But this one, I'm letting it live, because I want you to read what I've never had the courage to say out loud, or maybe what I've only said in pieces. You didn't just come back, you arrived, fully, bravely, quietly. You let Solis find you before you tried to fix anything. You let me decide what forgiveness would look like. That's not small. That's not passive. That's strength I didn't know how to ask for. You once said you didn't have a map for love, but every day you show up with a compass. Not perfect, not polished, but present. And now it's my turn to show up, not with caution, but with choice, with clarity, with my version of stay. So here it is, stay. Not just in this house, not just in this rhythm we found, but inside the spaces you never asked me to enter. Stay in the parts of me that were convinced men only love when it's convenient. Stay when I'm tired of being strong and just want to be held without asking. Stay when I'm loud, when I'm petty, when I overthink dinner and underreact to good news. Stay as my friend, as Solis's example, as the man who didn't chase applause, but built trust in silence. I don't want a fairy tale anymore. I want a faithful one. And somehow you became that. So this is my letter, my vow, written not for ceremony, but for us, for every soft Sunday, every storm, every moment in between. Stay, because now I'm choosing you back, Kimura. Her hand trembled as she signed the bottom, but her heart didn't, not anymore. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a deep navy envelope. No wax seal, no flourish, just her handwriting on the front for Grayson, when you're ready. She didn't plan to hand it to him tonight. She didn't need to. This wasn't a performance. It was a truth that could wait. Because she finally understood something. Real love doesn't knock loudly. It stays and waits. She walked to the bedroom, paused in the doorway. Grayson was there, half asleep, book on his chest, lamp still on. She smiled, slid the envelope into the drawer on his side of the bed, then turned off the light. She slipped under the covers beside him, close enough to feel his breath shift toward her. "Everything okay?" he murmured. "Yeah," she whispered. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just skin, breath, and the quiet sound of choosing. The wind over the mountain desert was gentler tonight. A fire crackled behind their small adobe house, embers glowing like quiet stars beneath the sky's velvet dome. Grayson sat with Solis bundled in his lap, the boy's head resting against his chest, heavy with sleep. His tiny fingers curled around the hem of Grayson's flannel shirt, as if instinctively refusing to let go, even in dreams. Kimura sat beside them on a woven blanket, knees pulled to her chest, chin resting on them. Her eyes weren't tired. They were full of memory, full of future, full of the man and boy who had rearranged her entire heart. Grayson looked at her. She looked back. No one needed to speak, but she did, just once. I used to think love had to roar. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. I thought it needed to fight for me, rescue me, sweep in with a banner and a soundtrack. She smiled softly, the flames flickering in her eyes. But it didn't. It just stayed. Grayson ran a gentle hand over Solis's back. He exhaled. I used to think I had to earn everything, that nothing I was would ever be enough unless I bled for it. Kimura's hand found his under the blanket. "You bled in ways I'll never fully understand," she said quietly, "but you also healed." He turned toward her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know," she whispered. "I just needed to believe it first." Solis stirred slightly in his arms, murmured something about pancakes and tigers, then drifted back into sleep. Grayson laughed under his breath. "Someday he's going to ask how we did it," he said. Kimura looked out at the desert horizon. "What will you say?" He paused, then answered slowly. "I'll tell him it wasn't perfect, that we made mistakes, that we were scared sometimes, but that we never stopped trying." Kimura nodded. "And that we chose each other, even when it wasn't easy." He glanced at her again. "I'll tell him we didn't just fall in love, we built it, day by day." The fire crackled louder for a moment, as if agreeing. Then it softened again. Kimura looked down at Solis. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the storm hadn't come that night?" Grayson grinned. "All the time. And I'd probably still be a ghost of myself, floating through cities, mistaking success for meaning." He looked at her, steady, grateful. "That storm didn't wreck me, it woke me up." She leaned her head against his shoulder. Solis between them. The fire before them. A future unfolding, quiet, unforced, beautiful. There was no final confession. No grand climax, just breath, hands, hearts choosing again and again and again. A quiet fell over them, heavy with comfort. Kimura whispered one last thought. "So this is the final answer, isn't it?" Grayson looked down at her. "At last, dear listener, if your heart made it to this fire with us, then you know. Sometimes love doesn't come crashing in with perfect timing or polished intentions. Sometimes it shows up after the mistakes, after the silence, after the storm, and still it chooses to stay. This story was never just about a man and a woman finding each other again. It was about a little boy named Solis, who needed a father. It was about a woman who didn't need saving, but deserved staying, and a man who thought he had to prove his worth until love taught him to simply be. Now it's your turn, family. If this story touched something in you, if you believe love isn't a moment, but a choice made again and again, if you've ever hoped for a second chance, even in silence, tell us where you're watching from. Comment, "Love stays if you believe real love holds on without demanding applause." Like this video, subscribe to join our growing family. Share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Because here on Love and Twilights, we don't just tell stories. We build healing, one tale at a time.